It's 2011. While Warner Bros. Has had a huge success with their DC brand in the form of The Dark Knight, the DC brand was relatively underused, and with the MCU showing its starting foundations and Christopher Nolan getting ready to finish his trilogy with The Dark Knight Rises, the company realised they needed something to take over once this happened. As such, Man of Steel was set for production, slated for release in 2013 under the writing of David Goyer, the directing of Zack Snyder, and with Christopher Nolan helping as a producer. The film was going for a much darker and more realistic tone to the film, trying to look at how people might react to Superman in the modern age, offering some designs and concepts we hadn't yet seen in Superman on the big screen, which is why it's such a shame that the film sucked so badly when it came to presenting them.
Just let him die?
Maybe.
What the fuck?
Some concepts were good, some concepts had potential but just needed a bit more polish, and many more were just a bad idea. Initially I was just going to look at a few different scenes throughout the film, but so many different scenes from different parts of the story connect to each other to the point where I would basically be talking about most of the film in the first place. So now, let's make a start on looking at Man of Steel, and seeing if it truly deserves the praise it gets as the best superhero origin story ever. The movie begins on the alien planet of Krypton, with Jor-El and his wife Lara welcoming their newborn baby into the world, the first natural-born Kryptonian in centuries. After attempting to talk to the Council of Krypton, General Zod storms the meeting, commits a coup, and begins to fight the government in a civil war as the planet starts to die. Stealing the Codex, a biological device that contains the DNA of the Kryptonian race, Jor-El transfers it into the body of his newborn son, alongside a computer key, and places both of them into a spaceship. Jor-El fights off Zod and his soldiers so the ship can launch, although he dies in the process. Regaining control, the Council sentences Zod and his forces into the Phantom Zone, with the planet then exploding, wiping out the Kryptonian race.
Brother, what's that?
So, first off, we have this entire situation in the first place. Now, I'm gonna jump the gun a little bit, but that's only to establish the context about why this opening scene is so fucking abysmal. So later in the movie, an AI of Jor-El is giving Clark a history lesson, and he says they explored space for 100,000 years, settling on thousands of different worlds. That was, until they randomly decided to enforce population control, abandoning all the planets and the outposts, and brought everyone back to Krypton. So, film, are you going to try and explain why any of this happened?
No time for that.
Oh, alright then. Please also bear in mind that, as apparent by several other comments made by Jor-El, the people of Krypton are aware that yellow suns and Earth-like planets give them superpowers. Yet, instead of doing the smart thing, and staying on the worlds where they never need to worry about eating, drinking, sleeping or breathing, where they could fly, were extremely tough to physically harm, could shoot lasers from their eyes, and would only age over the course of hundreds of thousands of years, they decided to leave all that and go back home.
Right.
So, naturally, having thousands of worlds worth of people come back to Krypton devastated the energy resources that they had. So, what was the grand idea that they did have? Did they get some solar power going? Create some dams? Build a fucking windmill? No, instead they decided to drill through the planet and mine its core for energy. And apparently, of all the billions of people living on Krypton, Jor-El was the only one with the intelligence to point out that removing the wooden beams keeping your house up for fuel is going to make your entire house fall down.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, okay. Yeah, okay. Yeah, okay. Yeah, okay.
One member of the council unironically says,
"Our energy reserves were exhausted. What would you have us do?"
"Oh, I don't know. Maybe don't do something even a primary school child would know is a bad idea." Jor-El then says they could go back out to other worlds and live on them, with another councillor saying,
Are you seriously suggesting that we evacuate the entire planet?
No.
"Oh, Jor-El, how stupid of you. Are you seriously trying to tell us that we shouldn't commit suicide if we want to live? Silly Jor-El." Jor-El then says,
No. Everybody here is already dead.
"What do you mean it's too late? Before you said..."
Krypton's core is collapsing. We may only have a matter of weeks.
That's plenty of time to start evacuating people. Unless you were saying that it's too late for them as a species, but that's not exactly fair, is it? There seems to be a wide variety of different classes of Kryptonians, with Zod being a military class and the councillors being political class. with Jor-El being of a science class. So surely there are billions of other people from different classes that are innocent of any crimes against Krypton, and you yourself even talk about your symbol and what values you have to Clark later, but you want them all to die as well. We even see later that there's these pods that are filled with babies. Why don't these ones that are purely innocent and haven't done anything wrong yet get to live? And don't tell me it's because Jor-El wants to get rid of the bloodlines born into the class system the Codex created, because 1. Just because you're born into a specific class doesn't mean you can't change or learn things outside of your designated class. For instance, Jor-El, part of a science class, actually gains the upper hand in his fight scenes because everyone thinks he's just a scientist, when he's actually learned how to be a warrior on top of that. So Jor-El knows perfectly well that the later generations might be able to grow and change as he did. 2. When Zod talks about purging weak bloodlines from the Codex, Jor-El is thoroughly disgusted by this, showing he still highly values all the Kryptonians that can be created from the Codex. 3. Instead of letting the Codex be destroyed, Jor-El actually wants to save it, seemingly so that later down the line his son might be able to use it to restore the Kryptonian race. These children will also be born into the class system, which is what the Codex is designed to do. That's why they chose artificial breeding. So he wouldn't be saving it if he wanted to get rid of the Kryptonians born from the class system. So overall, I don't have a clue why Jor-El doesn't even try and save some of his own people, when he clearly values them. But I do find it ironically hilarious because he has a go at Zod over callously deciding which bloodlines get to live and die, where here he just states that no one should get to escape the planet and live because he doesn't think they should.
Here he is, the biggest douche of the universe.
So Zod bursts into the chamber, kills his counselor, and then states that the rest of them will stand trial. A bit weird that you arbitrarily decided to execute one but not the rest, but that's an issue that's way down on the list. He then says,
"These lawmakers, with their endless debates, have led Krypton to ruin."
Now, as we find out later, Zod, because of the way the Codex made him, is programmed to be loyal to Krypton. Not the Kryptonian Council, as we see here, but just Krypton in general, as a planet, as a society, as a species. Yet, despite his loyalties and despite how devoted to his people he is, it's only after the Council destroy their planet's core to the point that both Krypton and its people will go extinct does Zod decide to do anything to stop them. Not, say, when they first tried to do such a colossally stupid idea.
You're fired.
So Zod is leading a coup, has control of a strong segment of the military, and doesn't agree with the idea that they should just wait around until the planet explodes, and wants to save the Kryptonian race. So what does Zod do now? Is he going to use his resources to create some bigger ships for his people to escape in? Is he going to just use the ships he has now to evacuate what he can and then leave? Of course not. Instead, he's going to lead a civil war, wasting time and resources, so that he can kill all the people that are going to die when the planet explodes in a few weeks.
What?
I thought generals had good planning skills. How is this fucker a general? Zod states that he will remove the bad bloodlines from the Codex, the bloodlines that ended up creating the current council members. And Jor-El asks him,
And who will decide which bloodline survives, Zod? You?
I mean, so far in the film, we've had people who deliberately destroyed their own planet's core for fuel, people like Jor-El who stood around and did nothing, and people like Zod, who, eventually, put a stop to their actions and is now asking for help to save their citizens, instead of doing nothing while their planet explodes. And according to the film, I'm supposed to agree that Zod is the one who doesn't have the best judgment?
Oh wait, you're serious? Let me laugh even harder.
So Zod asks Jor-El to join him, and Jor-El refuses. Why?
You've taken up the sword against your own people.
I mean, come on Zod, what kind of monster would kill the innocent council members that deliberately tried to kill the entire planet? Are you so heartless? So Jor-El manages to escape and head straight to the Codex. Bit strange that Zod was smart enough to remove the council from power but wasn't smart enough to send some of his men to guard arguably the most important relic on Krypton, but whatever. So he gets the Codex and heads outside, only to be stopped by Zod's men. They then tell him,
Jor-El, by the authority of General Zod, surrender the Codex.
So they know that he has the Codex on his person, which from what is shown appears to be a piece of skull, so it's not like it's made of a strong material like metal. Then, despite the fact that Jor-El does absolutely nothing but stand there, they shoot a missile at him. Now, as I've already mentioned, the Codex is a skull. Can someone explain to me what a missile would do to a skull? That's right, destroy it. What about a 500-story fall? That's right, destroy it. So this soldier risks dooming his entire race for absolutely no reason other than the plot needed something to happen.
You stupid bitch.
So Jor-El is saved by coincidental timing and arrives back home. They discuss the planet they are going to send him to, Earth, and we then actually get a very touching scene involving the two parents and Kal-El, as they acknowledge that they must send him away so that he can live, while at the same time reflecting on the fact that they will never get to experience life with him.
We'll never get to see him walk. Never hear him say our names.
We then get a scene of them placing the codex inside Kal-El, and we get the question, was it really necessary to put the tiny baby penis on screen, especially when it's front and center in the shot?
You did not have to do that. You knew you did not have to do that. How could you have done that?
After the download is complete, he takes a computer key, puts it in the crib, and then loads them into a ship. Zod then arrives and demands that they stop the launch sequence and give him the codex. Jor-El refuses, saying,
And he will be free. Free to forge his own destiny.
That's a good line. I hope something later doesn't contradict it. Jor-El proceeds to shoot and kill the two guards that are accompanying Zod, allowing Zod to release his arm blade and instantly kill Jor-El, stopping the launch sequence and securing the codex. Zod, you okay, buddy? Just you decided to get into a fist fight with him instead of eliminating him. Oh well, I'm sure Zod randomly doing idiotic things isn't going to be a central part of his character.
That's a surprise tool that can help us later.
So Zod and Jor-El fight until the ship is launched, upon which Zod kills the distracted Jor-El. When asked where the ship is going, Lara says,
And he's beyond your reach.
What? Is this movie telling me that, despite the fact that they were once a space navigating empire, that none of these ships have the capacity to travel through space after the ship?
That just makes no fucking sense. I mean, it's just bullshit.
So we go outside and Zod, the strategic genius he is, obviously wants the codex intact. So he orders his men to...
Bring that ship down.
I'm sorry, what? So you want the codex and plan on restarting society and saving your people, yet instead ordering the ship to try and intercept Kal-El's pod, your first resort is to blow it up.
You stupid son of a bitch.
Zod's ship is destroyed and Kal is able to get away. Taken prisoner, Zod vows to find Kal, before he and his crew are placed in butt plugs and sent into the Phantom Zone. Why they wasted precious time and resources putting them on trial and sending them to the Phantom Zone while their planet is dying is beyond me. I guess the counselors are the physical representation of Mr. Bean's brain. Whew, boy. Well, that wasn't a great start to the film. Well, surely it's not all that bad, right?
Maybe.
The movie cuts to a fishing boat and we are then introduced to one of the strongest heroes in DC history. I'm talking, of course, about this guy, who somehow has the physical strength necessary to push fucking Superman out of the way. Upon seeing an oil rig that has caught fire, Clark goes over to it and ensures that the people inside are rescued, even at the possibility of his secret identity being exposed, showing that, despite his best, Clark is too emotional to stop himself from helping people that are in need of help. I hope there's nothing later in the film that contradicts that. We then get a flashback scene of when Clark was a child, and it establishes that Clark did not gain all of his powers at the same time, and in fact it took years living on Earth for them to first appear. I hope there's nothing later in the film that contradicts that. Upon landing on shore, he proceeds to do the heroic thing and steal people's clothes, and then moves on.
Stop right there, criminal scum!
We then get the bus scene. Apart from the fact that it seems like the bus driver doesn't really seem to try and do anything to slow down and instead just keeps swerving the bus around, I don't really have a problem with it. It gives us an understanding of just how strong even a young Clark was, it gives a realistic scenario where he would need to use his powers, and it shows that despite all of his uncertainty and despite the risks, Clark cares about people too much to not save their lives. I hope there isn't a scene later in the film that contradicts that. Later, Ginger Kid and his mother come to visit the Kents and talk about what happened, only for the Kents to deny anything ever happened. What? The bus clearly went off the bridge into the middle of the river. There would be drag marks from the bus being pulled out of the water. There was plenty of passengers that can attest that the bus was pulled out by Clark. And there's the fact that even if their claims were dismissed due to shock or PTSD, then you have all the people using this road who would be looking at this scene, including the people in this car, who would be able to see the entire accident unfold. On top of this is the 90s. The internet is starting to actually develop into something, including the ability to upload news articles. Any journalist that gets even the slightest whiff of this story is going to hound it for as long as they can, especially considering that there is literally no explanation about what happened except for the crazy story that the locals are saying. I mean, Lois manages to track down the evidence decades after this story happened and figure out the truth, so how the hell did no one else do this? And don't tell me it's because Lois is an exceptional reporter, because all she really did is talk to people involved in the accident, which every journalist with a functioning brain would do. So we move on to the next scene, and Clark is sitting on the truck. John comes over and scolds Clark for being so reckless with revealing his identity, understandably worried about if something could happen to his son now that people know. Clark then asks,
"What was I supposed to do? Just let him die?"
John Kent, the man that went out of his way to save someone that wasn't his responsibility, a man that wants his son to grow up to be a good man, a man who understands that the people Clark saved were kids that had parents that worry for them, just as he worries about Clark, then says,
"Maybe."
What the fuck are you doing?
Now, I totally understand the point of view that he in the film is trying to tell Clark and the audience. He doesn't want Clark to expose himself because he doesn't know what could happen in the wider world if his powers came to light. Fair enough. But why, of all the words and phrases in the English language, would you use the word
"maybe"
to the question of, should I let a bunch of children slowly drown to death in a river? Let's do an edit. Let's get rid of the maybe and see how much less psychotic he sounds.
What was I supposed to do? Just let him die?
There's more at stake here than just our lives, Clark, or the lives of those around us. When the world finds out what you can do, it's going to change everything. Our beliefs, our notions of what it means to be human, everything.
You see, it's one word, but it completely fucks with the scene and the message it's trying to get across. So after his opening speech, John then says,
"You saw how Pete's mom reacted, right? She was scared of Clark."
Alright, so whatever John's point at the start of the speech was, it is now thoroughly obvious that it's bullshit, because here he just straight up lies to Clark about his situation. She wasn't scared. Not only was she not scared, she was praising Clark and actively calling him God's gift.
I'm sure what he thought he saw
was an act of God, Jonathan. This was providence.
Why would the message you try and explain in the film be, people are afraid of what they don't understand, but then you show two individuals knowing of Clark's real identity, choosing to respect and praise him? If you wanted John's argument to have any validity to it, and explain why Clark wouldn't become Superman until he was much older, then you should have given these two characters the complete opposite reaction in this situation. Have Ginger Kid not only refuse to become Clark's friend, but show that he actively avoids Clark because he doesn't want to be anywhere close to him. Show his mum coming over not to give praise of Clark's abilities, but show that despite the fact that he saved her son, she views him as an abomination, an insult to God. This would not only give John's argument the validity it needs for both Clark and the audience to believe it, but it would also explain why Clark was so hesitant to save people for another 2 decades of his life. But the film doesn't do this, and as such, John comes across less as a correctly paranoid parent and more of a controlling nutjob who will manipulate Clark for his own self-fulfillment.
This is the worst!
So after this motivational speech, Clark inquires about why he has these powers, and John takes him to see the ship hidden in the barn, explaining that he found him in the ship, that there was some sort of key with him, and that because he is an alien, he holds a lot of weight to both the Earth and mankind as a whole. We then get a touching scene where Clark says that he doesn't care about any of this, and he just wants to be John's son, with John reassuring him that he is. John tells him that he should try and find some answers about where he came from, and hopefully find out the reason why he was sent. So this scene in the barn is mostly great. I actually really enjoy it a lot. There's just this one little detail, this one little thing that I have a problem with. So I think it's fair to say that this version of John is a little paranoid, yeah? He doesn't like to take risks, he doesn't like to draw attention to himself, and he's worried that if any word got out about Clark and his true nature, he would lose his son, right? So why in the fuck would he take what is clearly an alien artifact to some random stranger so that they could tell him that it isn't from Earth?
I took it to a metallurgist at Kansas State. He said whatever it was made from didn't even exist on the periodic table.
No shit.
Do you understand how valuable extraterrestrial materials are to the scientific community? Governments spend millions to send people just to collect rock samples and bring them back. And you're telling me that some guy was brought a piece of metal that not only was not of this earth, but was clearly formed and shaped in a specific way, and he didn't mention this to anyone. No communities were contacted, no authorities were informed, there was no news reports asking for information on the guy that walked in with a one-of-a-kind item. You're telling me there was nothing? Jesus Christ. Christ. We then cut forward back to Clark's adult life, where he's working in a diner, where he overhears some soldiers talking about finding something in the Arctic, before intervening when a fellow employee is being harassed by a trucker. After the trucker attempts to pick a fight with him, Clark leaves, and when the trucker later leaves, he discovers that his truck has been impaled by logs. So, in order for Clark to discover what his key does and start to become Superman, he needs to find the ship. So of all the ways that Clark could discover this information, the way the film decides to do this is to conveniently have the soldiers very openly talk about it, not only at the diner that Clark works at, but at the same time that he is currently working a shift there. Now, it's not like this breaks the plot, it's a contrivance to be sure, but it could happen in the same way that, say, tomorrow a chimpanzee could escape from the zoo, do a mountain of cocaine and then steal my car. And then we have the fact that he destroyed this truck. Now, I don't have a problem with the fact that Clark lashed out in anger and used his powers for a sense of personal gain. In fact, it's consistent with his characterization as an emotional individual that we've been seeing over the course of this film. That definitely won't be ruined later on in the movie. No, the problem I have with this scene is 1. How on earth would Clark know which truck belonged to which trucker? He was busy doing his job. He wouldn't know which vehicle belonged to which customer, especially as he would have no reason to use his powers to monitor the dude before he started to cause trouble. He is extremely lucky he got the right truck instead of just ruining some poor bastard's life. 2. Just because this guy drives this truck doesn't mean he owns it. As far as he's aware, he could have just destroyed a company's truck. What if this was a small business? He might have just fucked them over. And that's not even getting into the fact that even if this is the guy's truck, that most certainly isn't his lumber. He's just transporting it. And now that's ruined too. 3. Let's just say that Clark is always monitoring who comes into the diner and the truck driver owns a lumber company that has its own line of transportation trucks. So the only person who is being hurt in this situation is the trucker. Why, of all the ways you could get revenge, did you decide to do this? One of the worst ways to conceal your secret identity. This is a public diner next to the highway. On top of that, the truck is parked right next to the front of the diner, right in front of the windows. Do you have any idea how loud pushing the lumber through the truck would be? People would be swarming outside to know what the loud crash is. How did the alarms not go off? When Clark left, it was daytime, but when the truck leaves, it's very dark. So has this thing just been sat suspended in the parking lot for several hours and not a single person came into the diner to tell anyone about it? Why would you not just pop his tyres or rip something out from under the truck, you absolute melon? So after blessing the audience with this scene, we then see Clark head north, presumably to try and find this weird relic the soldiers were talking about. In the next scene, we see Lois Lane arrive, who has been invited to document the weird relic found beneath the ice. So first key question, why is Clark here? And I don't mean why is he here at the Arctic, that makes perfect sense. I mean why is he here, working as one of the staff? He's been here for so long that he has a uniform and seems to be on terms with the rest of the staff, but he doesn't need to do any of this. He could have just gotten to the Arctic, used his X-ray vision, and gotten the ship. It's his primary objective, so why was he waiting so long before doing any of this? Is it because the plot needed an excuse for him to meet Lois Lane?
Yeah, pretty much.
Also, apparently the reason Clark can work here is because he faked some documentation to get a job.
He disappeared during the object's departure. A background check revealed that his work history and identity had been falsified.
Ignoring how someone who constantly drifts around and doesn't stick to one place managed to find someone that can get him fake documentation in a very short time span between Clark leaving the diner and Lois arriving at the facility, I highly doubt that Clark would be able to get this job with some fake documents. This is a project running under the watch of the US military. I'm pretty sure they do more than just look at your papers before giving you a job working alongside them. We then see Lois have the executives explain to her what they found, an unknown vessel deep in the ice. Later on, Lois is outside taking photos when she spots Clark in the ice, and so begins to follow as he lasers through it. Now, let's just talk about the fact that Clark has exceptional hearing and vision, as we see in this film and the later ones, where he's able to hear stuff even when he isn't actively trying, and he can find specific people and locations extremely quickly. Yet, despite Lois's boots crunching heavily on the snow and despite the fact that he is facing her general direction, Clark somehow fails to notice that she is standing there taking photos in his direction.
Look at this dude.
We then see Clark bring the ship back online and roam about the halls, discovering what is left while Lois sneaks in behind him. As she gets into the ship, Lois finds one of the droids roaming around and proceeds to try and take a photo of it. Now, I don't know about you guys, but if I came up to a rattlesnake and it then proceeded to start rattling at me, clearly signaling that it does not want me near it and it feels threatened, my first instinct would be to put my camera down and back away. I wouldn't start smiling and proceed to use my flash on it because that would be a stupid thing to do. Unfortunately, extremely intelligent award-winning reporter Lois Lane doesn't seem to understand this and proceeds to flash the obviously aggressive threat, causing it to lash out and shoot her.
Dumb bitch.
Now, as we saw in the Krypton scenes, these energy blasts are damaging enough that a single blast is enough to instantly kill a fully armoured Kryptonian military soldier. So I was a bit conflicted on this scene. On the one hand, I generally do like Lois Lane as a character. She helps Superman present himself to the world and helps to anchor him to the planet he chooses as family, instead of reuniting with the remnants of his own people, as well as her feisty personality and drive for the truth. On the other hand, this is trying to be a more realistic take on the Superman setting, and so having a new, naive Superman trying to tackle the world solo would be a new take on the character. Either way, Zack's decision to kill off Lois Lane this early is a bold choice, and it'll be interesting to see how it impacts the story and the other characters, and she's fine.
You should be dead by now.
A bit injured, but very fragile and unarmoured Lois Lane just has something that these guys didn't, most likely plot armour. So Clark arrives and destroys the robot, saving Lois Lane's life. We are then given a really great and horrifying scene of Clark having to cauterise Lois Lane's wounds in order to stop her from bleeding to death, using his heat vision on her as she screams in agony, before Clark takes the ship and leaves the Arctic. So, as we see Lois being found by the military in the nearby area, Lois is reading to Perry about what happened, how the military couldn't get a trace on who Clark actually is, and that, in conclusion, he and the ship are alien in nature. Perry says that they are unable to run this story, and the two argue about her using it, with Perry telling her that she would actually need evidence to print it, so he's not going to print it. Ah, Perry. So, Perry says that they can't print it because...
You might have hallucinated half of it. The Pentagon is denying that there was a ship.
Okay, a few things about that. As Lois says in her incredibly cringe and awkward expository dialogue...
Perry, come on, it's me we're talking about. I'm a Pulitzer Prize winning reporter.
There would be evidence that they invited her to the facility, and she has the other members there that are backing up her story. So like, why not print it? Like, I get that you're wanting to keep some integrity in the paper, but like, don't newspaper and articles constantly just post stuff to catch people's attention? And you don't really have anything to really lose by doing this. Even in real life, there's plenty of news articles that people have made talking about aliens and zombies and ghosts, so this would just be another one to add to the pile. Also, Perry mentions...
You might have hallucinated half of it.
Okay, so you've basically acknowledged that Lois was indeed injured during her stay at the Arctic, but you don't think her massive wound or the cauterized skin would be a massive piece of evidence to corroborate what your reporter is saying? Do you think she did it to herself? I mean, if you don't believe her, then you must think she did it to herself, yet you want to keep her on as a reporter.
What the hell is wrong with you?
So Lois goes to a blogger and asks him to release her article, while we then jump to Clark in the ship. He meets the hologram of Jor-El, who explains that he is the mind of his biological father, and Clark discovers that he is called Kal-El. Jor-El then proceeds to tell him about the spacefaring empire of Krypton, and I've already talked to you about how all of that is bollocks, so just listen to this line instead.
Your mother and I foresaw the coming calamity, and we took certain steps to ensure your survival.
So, everyone, let's remember, the guy who killed the people dooming their planet and was trying to save everyone, he is the bad guy. But the guy who knew that the world was going to be destroyed, didn't bother to tell anyone until it was already too late, and only built a ship for his child to escape, he's the good guy. Jor-El explains the Genesis Chamber to Clark, before telling him that he and his mother didn't want Clark to have a predetermined role. Remember this line. Clark asks why they didn't come with him, and Jor-El explains,
Your mother, Lara, and I were a product of the failures of our world as much as Zod was, tied to its fate.
So yeah, Jor-El is just a straight up dick. He could have helped save so many people and made sure that Clark wouldn't be alone, But he chose to not save anyone because he only wanted Clark to be saved, as Jor-El thought everyone else that was born in the class system would ruin it and repeat the mistakes of the past. Despite Jor-El himself being an example of how people can change their thinking and be better. But remember, Zod's the worst one in this situation. So Clark laments the fact that he is now alone as a species, and Jor-El points out that he is not alone as he has Earth. And then he says this:
"You can embody the best of both worlds. The dream your mother and I dedicated our lives to preserve."
Oh, so you fully intended for Clark to come to Earth and follow a set of ideals between both Krypton and Earth. So when you said,
"And he will be free to forge his own destiny,"
you were lying, because that would imply that you don't have a set path for him and you wanted him to make his own choices. Yet this line here explicitly tells us that Jor-El apparently wanted Clark to be a Superman-like figure from the beginning.
Why you always lying?
Jor-El then explains the symbol of House L and how it means hope. Specifically, how hope resides in everyone and that everyone can do good for society, before revealing the Superman suit to Clark. It's a good bit of dialogue. A bit undermined by the fact that his words here are directly contrasted by the fact that he had absolutely no hope in the billions of innocent people he let die on Krypton, but if you take his words here in isolation, they're good. Now, the suit itself, I don't think it's too bad. I think it would have done better with a red belt to help break up the blue, but I like how the material looks and I think it looks good on Henry. Just one quick question though, why is it red and blue? We see in both this film and later films that these suits are mostly in greys and blacks, including the suits used by the inhabitants of this ship. So why is this suit red and blue? Could you not be bothered to show Clark making his own changes to the suit, so you just gave him his iconic superhero look with zero reason for its existence?
That's just lazy writing.
As Clark puts the suit on and goes outside, we hear Jor-El explaining his abilities and the reason why he has them, saying that it's because of the yellow sun radiation and the atmosphere. So, without both, he loses his powers. Cool. Hopefully this will be reinforced at another point in the movie and not completely contradicted by it. We then get the first flight scene of Clark trying to push his powers to the limit, enabling him to eventually fly. And yeah, I mean, it's a really phenomenal scene. Good cinematography, we get to see Henry Cavill actually get a little bit of acting done, and the musical score is just great. So we then see that Lois Lane is investigating who Clark is and where she can find him, investigating as many rumours and urban legends as she can in order to find traces of him, eventually finding herself in Smallville. So yeah, Clark really didn't do a good job at hiding himself from the world if someone can track him halfway across the continent by only hearing rumours. But I guess I can't really blame him. After all, he's very quick to help the innocent and doesn't have a problem using his powers, so it makes sense with what the movie is showing us.
Sarcasm!
So Lois talks with a grown-up Ginger, and he directs her to Martha, who directs her to the grave of Jonathan where she finds Clark. Now, as we find out later, Martha clearly hasn't been in touch with Clark for a while as he's been on his quest to find answers. So why he decided to come here first instead of going home, or why Martha sent Lois to the graveyard when, for all she knew, Clark could have been on the other side of the planet is beyond me. So Lois asks Clark what he is and if she can tell his story, with Clark rhetorically asking what if he doesn't want to come out into the public, with Lois highlighting that anyone could realistically find out who he is, with her being an example. Then we get some really baffling dialogue between the two, where Clark says that he can just disappear from the public, and Lois saying that he wouldn't do that because that would require him to stop helping people, which he doesn't want to do. So first off, Clark says that he will just disappear from public again.
Oh, and then I'll just disappear again.
That doesn't matter, my dude. Lois has physical proof of the fact that he can now be tracked down to Smallville. So disappearing out of sight is irrelevant because you've already left too much proof. Then Lois says that he won't do that as that would require him to stop helping people. Now, while she is sort of right in one aspect, she also should probably point out that even if he wanted to just uproot his life and leave to permanently disappear, his mother wouldn't be able to do that. So disappearing shouldn't be an option. Overall, I just think it's a very weird conversation. Perhaps that's just me, but... So Clark says...
My father believed that if the world found out who I really was, they'd reject me.
Yes, Clark, your dad did say that. He also said that after at least a dozen people found out you had powers, and then not only immediately accepted you, but praised you for who you are. Your dad was an idiot, and you are as well for believing him. We then get that scene. You know the one. That one. the stupid death one. The scene opens with Clark wanting to do something else besides farming, and as the argument escalates, Clark has a go at John, telling him that he's not his real dad and that he doesn't need permission. Now, I know I just said that this was a bad scene, but I do like this opening for it. I think it's fair and realistic that these sorts of topics are serious and important, and it would make both sides argue to the point where one of them would pop off and say something in anger that they would later regret. It happens all the time in real life. Good job. Now the rest of the scene. So they stop the car as a tornado is forming, with everyone going towards the overpass for shelter. And then they realise that they left their dog in the car. They left their dog in the car.
Come on, man, what the fuck is you doing, cuz?
I'm sorry, but no, that just wouldn't happen. I get that when you're in a highly dangerous and hectic situation, it can be a bit difficult to keep track of everything. I speak from experience saying that. But at no point would I ever lose track of a family member, especially when they're out in the open and right next to me. So Clark volunteers to go get the dog, but John tells him not to, and to get the little girl and Martha to safety. Zack? It's a bit hard for me to take this scene seriously when you show the mother staying with John to make sure her daughter is okay, only for her to completely abandon her own child and force Clark to take her. Like seriously, where did the mother go? Why isn't she taking her own kid? Look at this and tell me this isn't one of the most contrived things you've ever seen. So instead of letting his super strong, super durable son get the dog, John decides to do it himself. And in the process, gets his foot crushed by some wreckage. Clark is going to go save him, but John doesn't let him, and then he dies, Lamal. That's not how tornadoes work, Zack! So people are saying that it makes perfect sense that John wouldn't want him to do this, as he doesn't want people to know about Clark's powers. And like, yeah, I get it, but it's not like Clark needs to zip over in the blink of an eye and pick him up one-handed. He could just run slightly faster than a normal human and pick him up with both hands. Remember, the human body is capable of some amazing feats. We just don't usually reach them in day-to-day life because the pain and the desire to avoid breaking something in the body just doesn't let us. But when under the effects of adrenaline and a life or death situation, you could really push your body to the extreme. And I mean, look at him. He's built like a brick shithouse. You think in this hectic situation, if Clark ran a little bit faster and was a little bit stronger than a normal human, that anyone would notice in all this mess? And so, Clark lets his dad die, and in doing so is completely character assassinated in the process. In all of the scenes we've seen of him so far, while he doesn't really flaunt his powers out in public for the sake of doing it, and while he doesn't really have any intentions on becoming this Superman figure until he talks to Jor-El, he is willing to use them to save people's lives if he can help it. And he's also willing to use his powers for petty revenge, because at the end of the day, Clark is unable to control his emotions and he will act, regardless of if it risks his secret identity or not. So I'm sorry, but you cannot tell me that Clark would be perfectly fine doing something like this when meeting total strangers that he has no real connection to, but he wouldn't risk exposing himself to save his dad. That doesn't correlate to anything that we've seen of his character so far, and on top of that, this is one of the least reckless usages of his power that Clark could do when saving someone. He isn't dragging a bus out of a lake, he isn't lifting up an oil rig, and he isn't smashing a truck with massive logs. He would just be running slightly faster than normal and carrying his dad to safety. But no, they needed a emotional death scene. So this is what they went with, and in the process they just completely assassinated the main character. If I have to be generous about this scene, I will say that, once again, it's great to see Henry in these scenes. He does a great job of capturing the raw anguish that Clark is supposed to be feeling. But yeah, just the whole scenario here is just so bad, which is why I think the original thing of John having a heart attack is so much better, because that's just something Clark can't deal with. So after having been blessed by this amazing death scene, Clark says,
I let my father die because I trusted him, because he was convinced that I had to wait, that the world was not ready.
Wow, you know, as much as I've railed against this movie, I have to give Zack and the writing team props for making the first Superman film where Clark is depicted as mentally handicapped. Because besides being badly written, that's the only way that this line makes any sense considering this scene exists.
I'm sure what he thought he saw
was an act of God, Jonathan.
You stupid.
Clark asks if his father was right that the world wasn't ready for Superman, and as Lois hasn't seen the rest of the movie, she agrees with him, attempting to drop the story. As she's talking to Perry about it, Perry puts her on leave for letting the blogger post her article all over the internet. Now, this next part might blow your mind, because it's one of the dumbest interactions between an employee and an employer that I've ever seen in my life, on top of being a weird conversation in general. After Lois says that her story didn't pan out, and after fully accepting and acknowledging what she's done and willing to take the punishment for it, Perry proceeds to punish her further. When she starts to push back, Perry then thanks her for dropping the story and telling her that she made the right decision in dropping it. You want her to drop it, you tell her to drop it, and when she agrees with you and starts to drop it, you punish her even more for agreeing with you. What a fucking shit boss you are.
Get fucked, pile of shit!
He then asks her how the world might react if they knew aliens exist, which would be a good question if the movie hadn't already answered it. We cut back to the Kent farm, where Clark is now arriving back home to see his mother. As they catch up, Clark explains that he knows who his real parents are, with Martha reacting with both excitement and sadness. When Clark asks what's wrong, Martha explains that when he was a baby, she used to stay by his crib, worried that his people would come and take him away, with Clark promising that he will always stay with her. I think this scene is genuinely enjoyable. I really enjoy how it shows the joy of Clark explaining that he found his real parents and his real people, only to become slightly guilty about the way he described his adventure when Martha becomes saddened by what he said. And then he tries to assure her that he will always love her and he isn't leaving her, on top of some good acting between the two. We then cut to a different scene of General Swanwick arriving at a surveillance room, learning that there's been an object approaching the Earth that appears to be a spaceship. The head scientist explains that it's staying in orbit around the planet, and despite them sending messages to it, they have not yet responded back to them. And I mean, yeah, this scene is fine, nothing to really talk about, it's quick and simple, and it achieves what it needs to.
Very good. Well done.
As Lois is at work, we see a video on the news showing the spaceship. As Clark is watching the, football, Martha calls him out to see something in the sky, and he sees the ship flying around in low orbit. Suddenly the electricity surges throughout the planet, and the TVs start to broadcast a message from Zod, saying how one of their people is on Earth and that if they don't reveal themselves and join him, he will make the world suffer the consequences. So, two problems with this scene. One is a little goof and something that I can overlook, the other is not. Let's start with the little thing. So, in our solar system, there's this thing called the sun. As our planet spins around it, the side that is not facing the sun will be dark, as no light is shining on it. In the first two scenes we see Lois and Clark, it is nighttime, and therefore the opposite side of the planet will have light on it. But then we are shown that it is completely pitch black in Asia and the Middle East, meaning that either Zack forgot the sun exists, or Zod has technology that can block the sun's light from reaching the Earth, which he then proceeds to not use to destroy the planet later on. Secondly, as we've already discussed, Zod cares about the people of Krypton above all else. Now, as far as he knows, the only people left are the people aboard his ship and Clark, with the Codex on Earth. Now, forgive me if I'm wrong, but when you have less than 50 people left for your entire species, threatening to attack the planet that currently has your most valuable artifact on it, and threatening a species that vastly outnumbers your own and has access to nuclear weapons, sounds like a really stupid thing to do, especially for someone who is a general and should know the importance of diplomacy and strategy. Is it because the film needs a villain?
Yes.
In the morning, as she's getting ready for work, the blogger Lois gave her article to earlier is doing a news interview, where he states that Lois knows where the alien is. As Perry warns her to tell her the authorities know what she knows, the FBI arrive, and despite trying to escape, she is captured. I think the scene is fine overall, but there's this really weird part where the camera is centered on Lois in the hallway, before it pans up to show the exit sign before she goes through the door. Zack, if you just showed her going through the stairwell, I think I could use my brain to infer she took the stairs. You didn't need to weirdly pan the camera up to explain this to me. As Clark arrives at a church, we get a flashback to him as a kid. As he's reading, he is dragged out of the truck by bullies, who shove him down and urge him to fight back, before running away when John notices them. Ginger Kid helps Clark up, seeing that Clark has bent the metal pole, and when John asks if he's alright, Clark explains that he wanted to hit the bullies, with John telling him that he's proud that he didn't, before telling him he needs to decide what kind of person he wants to be, as one day he will change the world. Alright, so first thing, why the fuck are these bullies here? This isn't some schoolyard or playground in the middle of town. This looks like some random chop shop in the countryside. Are you seriously telling me that these kids left school and came all the way out here just to bully someone?
Really, nigga?
On top of that, they decide to do this by going up to a car that doesn't belong to them, dragging Clark out, and then bullying him right in front of where his dad is, only to be surprised when John is watching them and then immediately run away afterwards. Is this movie fucking for real, or is this supposed to be a piss take of how bullies work?
It's just dumb!
Don't worry about the Jonathan Kent dialogue, I'll get back onto that later, but for now let me just say that this scene also isn't great. Even if I do like the bent pole scene, I thought that was pretty good. And I did like Ginger Kid's character arc. He really did the bully becomes nice person speedrun.
I'm not evil. I'm just pretty and misunderstood.
We arrive back at the church, and Clark explains to the priest that he is the alien they're looking for. And when the priest questions Clark on what he's going to do, he says that he isn't sure, as he believes that trusting Zod and trusting humanity are both bad choices. And as he leaves the church, the priest tells him that he just has to take a leap of faith. This scene, besides being part of the confusing nature versus nurture theme the film has going for it, and the fact that this dialogue is just cliched as fuck,
sometimes you have to take a leap of faith first.
This scene only exists to put Clark in the same shot as Jesus Christ. That's it. If Clark needs actual advice on what to do in this situation, he knows he can talk to Jor-El, the man who has intrinsic knowledge about how Zod thinks and acts. But for some reason Zack has this weird obsession both in this film and the later ones of comparing Superman to Jesus. So he and Goya put Clark in a church to talk to a priest instead of having a scene that makes sense.
By all accounts, it doesn't make sense.
Clark arrives at the base and states that he will surrender as long as Lois is set free. As he is escorted to Lois, she questions him about the symbol on his chest, and he explains that it means hope. Their talk is interrupted by Science Man and Swanwick, who are preparing to tranquilize him and state that they don't trust him. Clark explains that he will never be controlled by them, but that doesn't mean that he's an enemy. Overall, this scene is fine. I don't really have a problem with it, and I think it does the job it's designed to do, and everything pretty much makes sense.
Nice.
As he is preparing to surrender to Zod, Clark thanks Lois for believing in him, and then they hold hands. It's an okay start to the relationship these two will have. It in no way justifies what happens later, but it's a good start. The Kryptonians arrive at the site, and Fiora arrives to take them in, demanding that Lois Lane comes along as well. And despite this guy, who I'll call Chad, essentially telling her to fuck off, Lois comes along to keep the peace. I've got literally no idea why Zod did this. There's nothing about Lois that would help them because he can use the mind machine on Clark. And all this does is anger the US military by kidnapping one of their citizens, when they might have just stood down if he had left Lois alone. It literally only happens to keep the plot going. As they await to arrive on the main ship, Clark hands Lois this Kryptonian key for safekeeping. Okay, why? She doesn't know what it is or how to use it now, nor does she have any reason to suspect that she will be given the opportunity to do so while she's on the ship. So I'm not really sure why he did this. Is it so the plot could happen?
Yes!
Fiora comes back and gives Lois a mask, saying that she will not be able to breathe the atmosphere. As they meet Zod, Clark falls down and starts vomiting, losing his powers, with Zod explaining that he is not used to the Kryptonian atmosphere and he will need to adapt on his own. So remember how Jor-El said he needs both the sun and the earth's atmosphere to give him powers? Here is the scene that reinforces this. Good job. All you have to do now is not fuck it up. Clark wakes up inside of some sort of virtual computer, where Zod explains his history on Krypton, how they escaped the Phantom Zone when Krypton was destroyed, and how they searched the stars for other signs of their species. And although they found some pieces of technology, they didn't find any living Kryptonians, until Clark activated the ship in the Arctic, which allowed them to follow a distress beacon. Zod explains the codex to Clark, and says that it will be somewhere in the ship he used to escape as a child, and he will use that to revive the Kryptonian race.
So that Krypton can live again.
Okay, good. It's nice to see that after flexing his power a little bit to try and get some compliance, he is now ready to just peacefully talk things out so he can revive his race. You know, his entire life goal?
On Earth.
We see the world engine fire its beam into Earth, destroying the landscape. As Clark asks what will happen if he gives them the Codex, Zod essentially tells him that he's going to kill everyone and destroy everything on Earth to start Krypton again, before having Clark sink into a floor of human skulls.
We have just lost cabin pressure.
Alright, so I've pretty much debunked the idea that this is one of the best comic book movies ever, never mind the best origin story of all time, so allow me to add another thing on the kill list, that Zod is a good, layered villain. Now, Zod's main goal is to protect the idea of Krypton, and to continue it for as long as he possibly can. I actually agreed with him in the opening sequence because he's the only one who seems to actually give a shit about the billions living on the planet. But then he arrives on Earth and just becomes a complete fucking dumbass. At the moment, he has been around Earth for less than 2 days, despite being completely outnumbered, not having full knowledge of Earth's military and weapon capacity, and the possible risk that the Codex could be destroyed if he did something. He threatens Earth. Then, when he could just get Clark and leave, he then decides to take a human prisoner for no reason. Then, when trying to explain why Clark should help him revive Krypton, he decides to show him horrific visions of the planet being destroyed and skulls appearing to swallow him whole. You could make him more cartoonishly evil if you stuck a mustache on his face and had him goose step around yelling Zeke Heil. Literally the only reason he attacks Earth is because we've spent the past hour looking at some awfully constructed backstory to Clark and they needed to quickly establish some sort of villain for the rest of the film.
Because I like it. Hell, I love it. I'm sitting here, I'm just itching. I'm itching to do it again. And you think what? You think you're gonna send me to a nut house? Some doctor, they're gonna get me to stop from doing what I want to do? Well, that ain't happening.
So Clark wakes up strapped to a table, and Zod tells him that he will do whatever it takes to fulfill his duty. Well, everything except not starting a war with a bunch of people he doesn't need to fight, but basically everything. Zod sends 2 ships down to Kansas to get the Codex, and with the military observing that they're arriving in Kansas and wait. So we learn later that Zod used his virtual reality machine to read Clark's mind. Except if that's the case, why would Zod bother going to the pod when it was established that the pod already had been searched ages ago and the only thing left on the pod was the key? Is this because they needed an excuse to give Zod powers and keep the plot going?
Yes!
The Doctor tells Clark,
"The strength you derive from your exposure to the Earth's sun has been neutralized aboard our ship."
No, not just the Earth's sun, the atmosphere as well. Clark's entrance made that very apparent to you. As he takes some blood, we see Lois being taken to jail. Wait, why is she just being taken to a cell now? What was Zod doing with her while Clark was unconscious? Was it to stop the next scene from happening too early, otherwise Clark would stop Zod from leaving the ship?
Yes!
So Lois is left in a prison cell, and as she explores it, she notices a panel. And as she approaches the panel, she puts the key in the panel, activating Jor-El's AI. I'm sorry, but why the fuck is there just a random panel in the prison cell? Why would you design a prison cell where you have the possibility to open the door from the inside? It's entirely possible that this ship doesn't have a cell and they are using a normal room as a substitute. However, I don't know why they didn't keep her restrained like Clark, or even kill her, as she is now useless to them. So anyways, Lois puts the key in and activates the Jor-El AI, who is taking control of the ship and turning the atmosphere to match Earth's, while he starts to explain how he can send Zod and his crew back to the Phantom Zone. As they escape, a soldier comes around the corner and proceeds to not use her gun despite Lois being right in front of her. This allows Lois to arm herself and continue, and we then see Clark manage to snap out of his restraints. Wait, what? How? He was depowered and then locked up in an isolated room away from the sun. How would he have his powers back? What are you doing?
He kind of forgot it.
As Zod starts to close in on the farm, we see Lois having to deal with highly trained soldiers that don't know how to shoot their guns. As Lois reaches an escape pod, she is attacked by one of the soldiers, which damages the pod enough that it is unable to function properly, crashing towards Earth. That's a shame. If only there was a highly advanced AI plugged into the ship that could have shut the door and prevented the soldier from attacking her.
Absolutely useless!
Wait, actually, that's a good point. So Jor-El is hooked into the ship and is capable of taking control over its systems to help Lois and Clark. So could he not just shut the ship down? Overload the ship's systems until it runs out of power? Maybe even use its weapon systems to destroy Zod's ships? There seems to be an endless amount of possibilities for Jor-El to use, but he relegates it to just opening the doors and changing the atmosphere. So Clark gets off the table and talks to Jor-El, who gets him to smash the side of the ship to escape. As they talk, Jor-El talks about how great Clark will be and that he needs to save Lois. As Lois plummets towards the ground, Clark races in to rescue her, saving her before her pod hits the ground.
What the f***?
Okay, so no one in development of this film has any clue how Clark's powers work. It's explicitly made clear at the start that it requires both the sun and the Earth's atmosphere together to function, a claim that's backed up by how his body reacts when it enters Zod's ship. But then in this scene he is able to use his powers despite only having access to the atmosphere. In here he is able to use his powers despite the atmosphere having been destroyed in the vacuum of space and therefore only having access to the sun. On top of that, he is able to punch a hole into the side of a highly advanced alien spaceship made of an unknown but highly durable and strong material. So in the later fight scenes when he's struggling, please bear in mind that he has the ability to do this with one punch despite having just regained his powers and still being very weak.
I'm so confused.
Jor-El talks to Clark about saving Lois and the rest of mankind, something I'm going to be going more into when I talk about the themes. Finally, instead of immediately going after Lois and saving her life, Zack once again needs some Jesus imagery in his movie, so he had Clark do this weird T-pose into the vacuum of space instead of just flying out normally. As Zod arrives at the farm, we see Clark bring Lois down to the ground and make sure that she's okay, and we get this scene that I really like. As Lois tries to apologise for giving away information, Clark tells her not to worry as Zod used the same mind-reading machine on him as well, being very understanding and sympathetic towards her. But then, as this is taking place at the same time that Zod is arriving at the farm, all of a sudden Clark's face becomes filled with dread and he quickly shoots off into the sky, highlighting his hearing abilities. I think this is done really well, and it just shows how in certain scenes body language is infinitely better than any words that can be spoken. After being threatened by Fiora, Martha points them towards the ship, but as they open it they discover that it is empty, angering Zod and causing him to threaten Martha. Clark then proceeds to launch Zod away from the farm, causing their fight to end up in the Smallville town centre. Now, despite the sheer amount of destruction in this scene, some people defend this scene and justify it by saying that this is the superhuman equivalent of a rugby tackle done on instinct. Alright, so as I've already said, Clark in this film is a very emotional person, despite what the movie tries to tell you. As such, I am more than happy to see Clark lose his temper and do something without thinking. The problem that arises from this situation is that Clark has much faster reflexes than us. He is able to control where he flies, even if he breaks the sound barrier doing so, and that would require having the reflexes to process information going at over 700 miles per hour. So, Clark has just started to launch Zod away from the farm and away from Martha in a fit of anger. However, as we've discussed, Clark has superhuman reflexes. So even if he is still angry with Zod, I don't see any reason why he wouldn't be able to notice the road and the silo coming up. I definitely don't understand how he didn't notice that they were approaching Smallville when he has the ability to look into space and see spaceships. So this I can justify. The rest of the scene? So Clark ends up taking the fight into Smallville and... Right, so I'm going to have to give a physics lesson here. When you use an extreme force on a weaker object, there's going to be a large amount of debris created by the force afterwards that can kill people. For instance, with grenades, while grenades can cause serious damage from the actual explosion, it's usually the fragmented shrapnel travelling at high speeds that ends up killing you. So how much damage do you think was caused when smashing into this 7-Eleven? Because any gas station attendant in there is dead. And it's not just him. There is a car parked at this gas station that the two end up destroying. So at least one other person was killed in this scenario.
You're an insane, degenerate piece of filth, and you deserve to die.
As the two come to a stop at the centre of town, Zod's armour is damaged, causing the Earth's atmosphere and the sun to start affecting his body. Clark, realising he left his mother with the other Kryptonians and wanting to take the fight away from innocent civilians, immediately grabs Zod and flies him back to the countryside to... oh wait, sorry, I must have hallucinated the last part. No, actually, Clark spends the next minute just standing there and lecturing Zod about why he's in pain, allowing the other Kryptonians to rescue Zod.
Could you be more worthless?
Another thing about this scene, in the first flashback, we saw it took several years living on Earth for Clark's powers to start to form, with him being about 8 by the time his hearing and vision powers started to take place. So how is it that Zod immediately starts to gain powers the moment he is exposed to the sun and the atmosphere? Is it because the film needs a boss fight?
I think that pretty much sums it up.
Clark urges the civilians to get inside as it's not safe, while Fiora and the discount Hulk approach him. Military jets and helicopters mobilise to attack the Kryptonians, and after attacking them once and going in for another attack, we get this scene. Now, I actually like this scene because unlike some of the other power scenes I'm going to talk about, this scene makes sense. In the opening and with the suit up scene, it's discussed that Earth has a much weaker gravity compared to Krypton. As such, it makes perfect sense that, if Krypton's gravity is much higher than Earth's, then regular Kryptonians would have strength that is much higher than a normal human's, being able to lift heavy weights and jump extremely high. So I don't mind Discount Hulk being able to do this.
Good job.
Also, in this scene they very visibly show a pilot get ripped apart and his body spray all over the place, which I thought was a surprising amount of gore for a PG-13 film. Like, I know it's off focus, but it's still in the centre shot. As Fiora starts to attack, Clark tackles her out the way, and I want you to bear this in mind. Smallville is surrounded by countryside and fields. Like, it would be so easy to take this fight to one of them, but for some reason, Clark decides to tackle her straight into an IHOP full of families and children.
You are a naughty bastard.
After endangering roughly 15-20 people, Clark decides to immediately take the fight away and... oh, no actually. Instead he decides to just stand there while he and Ginger Kid look at each other. Like, yeah, they know each other and they seem to be friends the last time we saw them, but surely that would make you more determined to remove her from the IHOP, not just stand there like an idiot.
Oh, fuck. I can't believe you've done this.
Fiora then says this absolutely cringe speech.
The fact that you possess a sense of morality, and we do not, gives us an evolutionary advantage. And if history has proven anything, it is that evolution always wins.
Woman. A species can thrive because of empathy. Using empathy and other emotional responses allows people to be able to stick together and form bonds that keep them together and be stronger as a society. If you don't have empathy, your entire civilization wouldn't be able to exist, because no one would care about each other enough to keep it going. Was the destruction of your planet not enough for you to understand that?
You twat.
Also, Fiora does a better job at taking the fight out of the IHOP full of people than Clark does. Just pointing that out. Hopefully this doesn't become a running scenario. Clark, tired of listening to absolute cringe dialogue, starts to fight back, only for Discount Hulk to come along and double team him. Wait, where does Hulk come from? We see that Hulk comes from the right of the camera, but that's the direction that they just came from, and there was no sign of him here. Did Zack just teleport Hulk to keep the fight going?
You're goddamn right.
The military starts to move in while Clark is getting double teamed, and we finally see Clark attempt to take the fight away from Smallville. It doesn't work, but at least we see him try. As they then proceed to pin him down, Clark uses his heat vision on them and... wow, look how damaging that is. Not only is it causing them pain, but it's damaging their armor as well. Now that Clark is aware of a weapon that can cause serious damage against them, I look forward to the film not using it again. As they prepare to face off again, the helicopters open fire on the group. And as Hulk throws a van at one of the helicopters, one of the soldiers falls out of the helicopter, with Clark saving him. Good. This is what we like to see. A Superman that is saving people and isn't Randy Ortoning into restaurants. Clark begins to deal with Hulk while Fiora begins dealing with the soldiers. Using super speed? Now, this doesn't seem to be a case of her just using her strong legs to make herself look fast like the Hulk did. When Hulk does it, he keeps his legs in relatively the same position. He just uses a tremendous amount of force that lets him travel at speed. Meanwhile, Fiora's legs here seem to change positions constantly, and she also changes the direction she's facing, implying that she's using some sort of super speed to constantly change her positioning. And it's not like she has powers because she's in her suit. So overall, I've got no idea how this works. We then have this small fight here between Clark and Hulk, and you know what? I dig it. It feels weighty. I think I would like fight scenes more if it felt like this. Chad calls in a danger close attack on his position and then tries to fight off Fiora. We then cut back to Clark fighting Hulk, with Clark managing to temporarily incapacitate Hulk, lifting him up and punching him directly into a train yard. Ignoring the fact that we don't know if anyone is in the train yard, please remember that Smallville is surrounded by abandoned empty countryside, and he could have easily punched him into that. I guess Clark just doesn't like trains. Also, please bear in mind throughout this entire fight scene, the military are shooting in both directions, because that's how you know you've got a good military, when they shoot at each other.
Sometimes my genius is... it's almost frightening.
As Chad starts to draw his knife, Fiora does the same, saying,
"A good death has its own reward."
And I mean, it's a good line and all, but her primary objective is to secure Clark, so I don't really know why she's wasting time talking to him instead of just... As Chad gets ready to fight her, Clark comes in and smashes her into the ground. And somehow this is the punch that damages her armour? Not all these other punches, not the laser vision, this punch here is what stops her.
How about no?
As Fiora tries to be edgy,
"You will not win. For every human you save, we will kill 1,000,000 more."
This is not okay. This needs to stop now.
Hulk throws a train at Clark, who proceeds to just stand there and look at it, instead of using his super speed.
Watch out! Watch out! Watch out!
Fiora then gets wrecked by a missile, and as more stuff blows up, Hulk takes her and leaves in their ship. The soldiers go into a nearby shop as Clark emerges from the wreckage, and as he approaches them they lower their weapons, accepting him as one of their own as Chad tells them he is not their enemy. After saying thanks, Clark quickly takes off, leaving the military to clean up the wreckage and sort out all the dead bodies that he caused.
Don't worry, everything is boom. We stopped the terrorists.
Whew, what a fight scene. I know that people say it's officially Clark's first day being Superman and that he doesn't have a lot of combat experience, but the fact that he had decades to train his abilities and biologically is a lot stronger than Zod's soldiers and he still fails constantly and brings fights to civilians is baffling to me. If I was a police officer, it being my first day on the force doesn't justify me bringing terrorists into a fucking shopping centre, does it? We cut to Martha scavenging in the ruins of her home, finding a photo album, and calling out to Clark that she is alright, with the two embracing in a hug of relief that both of them are safe, with Martha telling him not to worry when he tries to apologise to her. As Martha and Clark talk about the Codex and his people coming back, Lois arrives, explaining how she knows how to stop Zod. Most of this scene is fine. To be honest, I like the interactions between Clark and Martha a lot in these movies. But then we got the end of this scene. Lois has just arrived by police car, so obviously she is aware that they are not alone on the property. Yet despite this, Lois then proceeds to yell Clark's name across the yard instead of just running up to him and speaking to him discreetly. So now this police officer is aware that Clark Kent is Superman. Can someone please explain to me how you can be an award-winning reporter and also have the brain capacity of a fucking snail?
You fucking donut.
We cut back to Zod back on the ship, and the doctor explains that the reason they didn't find the Codex on the farm is because it's bonded to Clark's cells, and as such they will need to extract the Codex from his body, dead or alive, in order to restart the population. As Zod contemplates what he's just heard, he tells them to release the World Engine, beginning his invasion of Earth. You know, the more I think about it, the more this whole putting the Codex inside Clark thing just doesn't make any sense. So, the Codex is bonded to Clark's cells when he was a baby, but shouldn't these cells be gone by now? The human body replaces 330 billion cells a day, and roughly every 7 years most of the cells in your body will be completely different compared to 7 years previously. So shouldn't the Codex just be destroyed? If his cells still have the Codex in them, then that means he has to have the same cells for the past 30 years. But if that was the case, then his body wouldn't have been able to grow or develop, so wouldn't he still be a baby? Am I overthinking this?
Yeah.
Okay, so ignoring the whole cell replacement thing, let's just say that for the sake of convenience the Codex can jump from old cells into new cells. Would the Codex even be complete anymore? Now that sounds like a weird thing to say, but hear me out. So the Codex is in his cells, so as long as the cells remain in his body it can be reformed properly. But if that's the case, then every time Clark had a haircut, or a nosebleed, or took a piss, aren't those cells with the codex in them leaving his body? How are they supposed to remake the codex if some of it's already gone? When Clark spews up all over the floor here, isn't he technically throwing billions of little pieces of the codex all over the floor? Pieces that were then mopped up and discarded? Now imagine small things like this happening all over Clark's life. The codex would be non-existent by now, but apparently he has enough left in his body that no one is concerned about its condition.
Oh, that's convenient.
As the military begins to track the world engine, seeing it about to land somewhere in the Indian Ocean, we get some good looking shots of it approaching the planet, smashing down onto an island and throwing debris up in the air. Overall, this scene looks fine. My only problem with it is purely subjective. So I guess the sound they were going for here is supposed to be like screeching metal, something along those lines. But to me it just sounds like a pug. Again, this is just a me problem. I'm sure if you don't have pug screams etched onto your brain, the sound here is fine. As they track the main ship, we see to their horror that it is landing in Metropolis. And you know what? I enjoy this scene. Seeing the whole city just kind of slow down and stop as this giant ship towers over the city does a good job of highlighting the surrealness and horror that we might experience if aliens visited us in real life. I do have one little complaint about this. So the fight in Smallville has been going on for quite a while now, and the military was already mobilised before this because they knew that they were under threat. So now that the fight in Smallville is over and the world knows that Zod and his men aren't going to be peaceful, why hasn't anyone mobilised any sort of force against Zod and his ship? It feels a bit strange that Zod's ship is just up in orbit, being in the perfect position to be attacked without causing any harm to the planet or the living things on it, but the military just don't do anything. They just sit and track them and let them make the first move instead. And it's not just the military I'm giving shit for this. Clark has seen the damage that he can do when he is underpowered and unfocused. Who knows what he could do to them now that he's back at his full strength? But instead he decides to go have a chat with the military instead of disabling the ship. It's almost like he's forgotten he can do this so the movie can pad the runtime. Zod tells them to activate the Phantom Drive, linking the ship and the world engine together. As the gravity begins to distort, the Doctor tells Zod that they are now linked, and Zod tells him to initiate the procedure, beginning to terraform the planet. And again, the CGI is good and the horror of a ship just casually wiping out buildings, cars and people in seconds is played to its best potential. As the military observes what they're doing, they see that the world engine and the main ship are sending waves throughout the planet, increasing the mass of the planet and changing the atmosphere to match that of Krypton. Now, I've got a few things to say about this, both in terms of the science of it and Zod's motive for doing it. Right, so for a start, the scientist dude says that the mass of the core is changing, increasing in mass. Okay, like how? I mean, they're sending gravity waves throughout the planet, but all that would do is put pressure on the core, make it denser and smaller, not increase the mass. This is just me making presumptions on how this thing works, by the way. I'm not a scientist, so this is more of a subjective criticism. If anyone in the comments could explain this to me, I'd be more than happy to take this point back. Secondly, let's just say that I'm wrong in that part, or that the machine just has some other feature that adds mass to the core. Aren't we all fucked then? Every single species on the planet has evolved to this environment, and that includes the gravity. So wouldn't this just completely screw everything up? Like, I know at this point it wouldn't be so bad, they've just started, but they start to notice an increase in mass now, and we don't even see the world engine destroyed for another 10 minutes. And that's just 10 minutes that we see. We have no idea how much time has actually passed in universe between all these scenes. By the time it's destroyed, the world engine would have completely changed a fundamental aspect of the world as we know it, but in the future no one mentions it and there's no signs of increased gravity. Now that we've got the sciencey aspect out the way, let's get down to how the inconsistent writing completely messes up Zod's plan here. Now, presumably Zod is doing this because he doesn't want to have superpowers or be gods. He just wants the Kryptonian race to be like it was before. And if the writing had been consistent, then getting rid of the Earth's atmosphere would have got rid of those powers. And so terraforming the Earth would make sense from this perspective. Unfortunately, the writing for this film isn't consistent. And as such, we have instances where both the Earth's atmosphere and the sun are needed for powers, only the sun is needed, and only the atmosphere is needed. As such, Zod's plan here is completely pointless, because even if he changes the atmosphere of the Earth to match Krypton's, he can't exactly change the sun. And as such, he will never be able to make the new Kryptonians like the old, because the sun will still give them powers. In short, Zod is throwing resources at a problem he knows he literally cannot change in any way.
Well, what's the matter? Is he stupid?
Swanwick is informed that Chad, Lois and Clark are on the way, with Clark having adopted the name Superman after Lois suggested it before. We see a helicopter arrive with Clark's pod that he arrived in as a baby. Wait, what? You're telling me that the military took this thing straight out the barn of the Kent farm to bring it here? So how does no one know who Superman is or where he lives when they literally go to his house and get something from them? Are they stupid? Clark explains that his pod has a phantom drive in it, a device that bends space and allows space travel. The plan that they're following, the one that Jor-El told Lois, is that they should collide the two ships together, and the phantom drive will bend space so much it creates a singularity, or, as Swanwick puts it,
like a black hole.
Yeah. Sucking in all the Kryptonians and their ships. Now, as mentioned before, I'm not a scientist, but something tells me they're getting an endless void that sucks in any and all matter, completely crushing and destroying anything it consumes, and being so powerful that even light cannot escape it, and placing it in the Earth's atmosphere would be catastrophic. I mean, there was a big controversy and worry about the CERN Hadron Collider because it had the possibility of creating a tiny black hole.
The Large Hadron Collider in CERN in Switzerland starts on Wednesday.
Or to give it its proper name, the Black Hole Machine.
And you're telling me that the plan here that Clark, Lois and the scientists are going with is to deliberately create a giant one? If the sheer retardation on display here could be physically harnessed as an energy source, we'd have enough power to keep the Earth powered for centuries. I've got a plan for you. Remember when you did this? Just do it again, to the whole ship. It'd take you less than a minute and you wouldn't need to possibly condemn the Earth to an all-consuming black hole either. Chad explains that they can get the ship up and running while Clark goes out to deal with the world engine in the Indian Ocean. Or, and this is just me spitballing here, instead of putting this pod on a normal, slow Earth ship that will be seen coming a mile away, why doesn't Clark just fly in at super speed and dunk it onto the ship currently attacking the heavily populated area, and then immediately flying to the Indian Ocean to deal with the world engine that's in the middle of nowhere? Is that an option, or...? Lois talks to Clark about how he will be weaker next to the world engine, and Clark responds that he won't let that stop him. We then get this bizarre scene.
You might want to step back a little bit. Maybe a little bit more.
Now, the reason I say that it's bizarre is that at this point, Clark jumping up to start flying and going to super speed has never been a cause of concern at any point in the movie, or will it be seen in any of the other movies. But for some reason here, he acts like doing this close to Lois will harm her, despite the fact that they were literally hugging each other when he did that the last time and she was fine. I know it's not a massive issue, but I don't understand why the film would draw attention to this now when it wasn't a problem earlier or later. And so Superman flies up into the sky, ready to head towards the world engine and stop Zod's reign of terror. As the gravity fields continue to destroy Metropolis, Zod lets Fiora take control of the ship while he goes to visit the scout ship Clark found earlier. Meanwhile, the military have loaded up Clark's pod and are on the way to deploy it on the ship in Metropolis. And one thing I'm wondering is, where is all the military? When the ship first landed, we saw some helicopters flying around it, and there's some jets here escorting the plane, but apart from that, there doesn't seem to be any sort of military presence attacking or even keeping an eye on the ship. It's just allowed to sit there peacefully destroying the city. Wait, and while we're at it, why the hell is Lois here? Ignoring the fact that she doesn't work for the government, they also don't really need her to do anything. The movie tries to pretend like she knows what she's going on about and they need her to get the phantom drive activated, but let's be honest, they don't need her. You take the key, you put it in the hole, and then you press it in. Yes, things go a bit wonky later, but she's not even the one who fixes that. They do not need to bring Lois along to do this. It's just an excuse to put her in Metropolis for a bizarre scene that happens later.
Absolutely useless!
We see Zod land next to the scout ship, and as he's outside, he takes off his helmet and absorbs the atmosphere and the sunlight, causing him to experience the same powers Clark has before honing in on them, controlling them. Now, I don't really have a problem with this. Clark was able to master these things quite quickly as well, so it's not inconsistent with what we've seen before. As Zod arrives at the ship, he inserts a master control key to take control of it, before Jor-El arrives and pleads him to stop. Jor-El, if you didn't want him to do this, why did you let him on the ship? We don't see any panel or key access points outside the ship. In fact, even before Jor-El was uploaded into the ship, it seemed to be automatic. So unless there's another way to open the doors that the movie doesn't specify, then I don't know how Zod could have gotten in unless Jor-El opened the ship for him. On top of this, we saw before that the ship moved when Clark first discovered it. Now, I can only presume that this was Jor-El's doing, as Clark would have no idea how to pilot the ship. So the question is, why didn't Jor-El take off when he saw Zod approaching? Is it because the plot forgot he could do this?
You are a third.
We see Clark approaching the world engine, but as it's cloudy and kicking up Kryptonian atmosphere into the air, Clark is weakened, struggling to keep flight. But it's okay, because we've already seen what a weakened Clark can do, so destroying the world engine would be no problem. Oh, you're just going to circle around it and then look at it instead of using your super strength. Okay. As Clark continues to menacingly stare it to death, the compartments of the world engine open up to reveal giant Dr. Octopus tentacles? Why? Remember, these things weren't designed to fight Superman specifically. These things were designed to fight off threats in general. But how would these things fight off something like an orbiting spaceship or a heavy weapon located miles away? Why would you waste time putting in giant robot tentacles when you could have just put in a super powerful gun that we've been seeing throughout the whole movie? Was it because you needed an interesting fight scene with Superman, so you just made a weapon that makes no practical sense whatsoever? As the military attempts to attack the main ship, they fire their missiles directly at the flying debris field. The whole gravity thing I can excuse, I'm sure this isn't something they're used to, but why would you aim at the one part of the ship that has stuff covering it to block your missiles? You have this entire structure here and you all aim for this small part of it. And then we hear one of them say,
"Gravity field is pulling our missiles down, we gotta get closer."
So you acknowledge that the gravity beam at the bottom of the ship is messing up your missiles, and you can see that the debris is blocking some shots. But instead of using your brains and deciding to attack from the top, where the gravity beam isn't located and there's no debris, your grand plan is to get closer and hope your missiles work better.
Are you retarded?
You understand that the same gravity beam that affects your missiles will affect you as well, right? You are fighter pilots. You of all people should be able to comprehend attacking targets from above, but your new plan of attack is to essentially kamikaze into the ship before firing your missiles.
That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard.
Alright everybody, we're leaving.
You're leaving the building now. You've been sat there for 10 minutes watching a large section of the city be slowly destroyed. And it takes this missile exploding near you to convince you to leave, not the thousands of people, cars and buildings that have been thrown around like ragdolls. On top of this, why is this thing firing missiles in the middle of the street away from the ship? After seeing Clark continue to fight the tentacle snakes instead of just flying through the world engine and ending the fight immediately, we see the news crew on the streets, watching the destruction go on around them. As a nearby building begins to collapse, we see one of them choose to just stand there looking as it slowly falls towards her. Now, I can understand people freezing and stopping when you're uncertain of what will happen if you move. If a lion appears in front of you, you're most likely not going to make a decision straight away. You'll weigh up the possibilities. What happens if I fight? What happens if I try to hide? What happens if I try and run away? And while we're thinking about those situations, it would be normal to freeze and try and comprehend what you should do. This is not one of those cases. This is a building very clearly falling towards you. You cannot hide from it, you cannot fight it, so your only option is to run. Yet instead of doing the only option she has to avoid death, she decides to just stare at it. And then when everyone starts to see the giant building falling, not only do some people continue to walk onto the street where the building is falling, but people run in a straight line alongside the building instead of ducking into the back streets. It's only at the last minute, when the building is on top of them, that the main cast decide to duck into the side streets.
You're a stupid dumbass.
Back on the scout ship, Jor-El states that both humans and Kryptonians can come together and live on Earth, with Zod replying,
"So we can suffer through years of pain trying to adapt like your son has?"
Zod, you took your helmet off outside and learned how to control your senses in seconds. This is such a garbage argument. It actually would have made more sense if he tried to argue for the purity of the Kryptonian race, talking about how those with powers aren't natural Kryptonians and are abominations, but instead he tries to argue a point that he himself could disprove in a matter of seconds. As Zod dismisses Jor-El's accusations of genocide, Jor-El states that they are both ghosts, with Zod being a former shell of a man who, even at his greatest, isn't anywhere close to being the man Clark is. I will say that despite all the garbage built around it, I do like the relationship between these two. They were both friends on Krypton who slowly became disillusioned with each other's methods of saving their race, with both sides missing their former selves but blaming each other for the downfall of their race. I like it. I wish we could have gotten more of this with some better world building. Zod states that he is going to kill Clark and build a new Krypton on his remains, before deleting the Jor-El AI and getting the ship in the Genesis chamber ready to go back to the main ship. And then we move on to 3 scenes that happen at the same time. So I'll talk about Clark first, and then Perry, and then the military. As Clark tries to take on the world engine, he continues to struggle against the robot tentacles, being wrapped up by them and then thrown into the gravity beam of the world engine. As the beam continues to beat him down, Clark slowly gets back up, gaining some strength to fly up into the world engine, destroying it. So once again, Clark could have just smashed in from orbit and gone straight through the world engine. I don't know why he chose to sit there and just stare at it until it launched its defenses. Then when it does launch its defenses, I really don't get how he's struggling with them, as he was able to do this when he was in a much weaker position. So surely he would have been able to just shrug off the tentacles and hit the world engine. And after this, when he is thrown into the gravity field, the tentacles just stop following him. Why? You want to protect the world engine from threats, so your idea on how to do this is to throw them right underneath the world engine and then just leave? The tentacles make no attempt to attack Clark when he's down or when he's flying upwards, so Zack literally just deleted them from the movie because otherwise Clark wouldn't be able to win. So yeah, not very great. I do like the end scene when he's lying down and reaching for the sun. I do like how the clouds dissipate and the sun starts to shine over him. I think that's a really good shot. Now, onto Perry. After some rubble collapses near them, Perry finds one of his colleagues trapped under the rubble, begging him to help and not to leave her as the gravity beam gets closer and closer towards them. Despite how hard Perry and the other colleague try, they are unable to shift the rubble, and as it seems that they're about to die, they comfort each other, before the beam suddenly stops, sparing them. I actually like this scene. While I still think the way that he's written as a boss is fucking bizarre and nonsensical, I do like that deep down Perry cares about his colleagues. Realistically, there wasn't really much of a chance that he would be able to save his colleague's life, and he could have tried to make a run for it and live. Yet despite this, he is willing to stay and try and save his colleague because, despite how unlikely it is, there is a chance that he can make a difference. A small chance that he is willing to risk his own life for.
Good job. Good job. Really good job.
The third scene is the military stuff, and to be honest, there's not really much to say about it. It's just Chad waiting on Swanwick to tell him if he's allowed to proceed, which he initially says no to as Superman hasn't destroyed the world engine, but then afterwards he says yes. Back on the plane, Lois tries to insert the key into the pod, but it does not go in, hovering over the keyhole. Now, as we find out later, the reason this happens is because part of the pod is not in the correct position. But why didn't Clark ask Jor-El how to set this thing up properly? It's not like Lois told Clark the plan, then Clark dumped the pod at the military base and then flew off towards the world engine. The military had to take the pod out of the farm in their slow-ass helicopter. So could Clark not check in with his dad to see exactly how the plan is supposed to go while he waits for the military to transport the pod over? I mean, what else would he be doing while waiting for the helicopter to arrive?
There's no time for that.
So as Chad goes to check out what's wrong with the package, Fiora spots them and goes to take them on. We then get a scene that is just full of things that just do not make any sense. So in very quick succession, Zod manages to destroy both of these jets. He destroys them in seconds. He then positions himself right behind the plane. But for some reason, instead of already being locked on and firing immediately, the AI then needs Zod to tell it that it needs to lock onto the plane. Remember, it immediately destroyed this jet and then locked onto the other to destroy it, but for some reason it takes over 10 seconds to lock onto the plane that will keep the plot going. Then, when he hears that the target is locked and that he can destroy the plane, instead of immediately firing, Zod decides to dramatically wait a few seconds before pushing forward, which leads to him doing nothing for so long that Superman can smash into his ship, knocking his ship off course. Speaking of Superman, I guess he really can fly around the world in a few minutes, once again making me question why Superman couldn't just fly through the main ship on his way to the Indian Ocean, saving thousands of lives in the process.
You suck!
As Clark smashes into the ship and is about to laser the ship's controls, Zod says,
If you destroy this ship, you destroy Krypton!
Zod's entire purpose and goal is to restore and keep Krypton alive. He can only do this with the Codex, which Clark is obviously in control of, and the Genesis chamber in the scout ship, which he could easily destroy. Using this knowledge, Clark is in the perfect position to make Zod and his crew surrender peacefully, maybe finding a new way to send them into the Phantom Zone, while he himself uses the Codex to bring the Kryptonians back, leading them into a peaceful union with humanity, a vision Jor-El dreamed of before his death. So, with the leverage that he has, and with the possible billions of innocent lives that he could create, what does Clark do?
Krypton had its chance!
I think I've already shown and explained plenty of reasons why people don't like this version of Superman. But if you want a definitive reason, right here Clark has the ability to end this fight peacefully. No more death, no more destruction. Instead, he allows the Kryptonian race to be destroyed, ruins any chance of the Kryptonian race coming back from extinction, smashes a spaceship through several skyscrapers that could be full of people, and then leads a fight to the death against Zod that causes more destruction and death towards innocent people.
What the hell is wrong with you?
Back on the plane, Fiora bursts through the bottom, sending this poor bastard flying out and knocking Lois down. As the military start to fire on her, she walks towards them, and then uses her enhanced strength to take them out. Once again, I really don't think her super speed stuff makes much sense. She doesn't have powers like Clark does. She can't affect her gravity and movement. All she has is the enhanced strength due to the Earth's gravity being weaker than Krypton's. So if she's pushing down with her strength here to try and move this quickly, shouldn't she punch through the floor because of the force of her steps? And once again, when Chad runs away and she follows him, she jumps up the floor and bursts through the wall of the plane. If she's jumping hard enough to smash through the plane's walls, then the force of that should be pushing her feet through the floor as well.
That doesn't even make any sense!
As Science Dude activates the pod, Chad tells Fiora,
"A good death is its own reward."
Now, this is a good callback, and honestly, despite how little we get of him, they give Chad a good little character arc. However, why does Fiora just stand there and stare at him when he pushes the plane into the ship? Maybe you could try and not let him kill all of your colleagues?
Suicide is badass!
As Chad Pearl Harbors into the ship and kills everyone, Lois falls out the back. And pay attention here because this scene is special. So as the Phantom drives collide and create a singularity, everything around it starts being pulled towards the black hole. Everything from cars to building to pieces of debris. Despite the fact that she is a lot closer and weighs less than all of the stuff on the surface, Lois somehow continues to fall towards Earth. And then, as Clark grabs her to stop her from dying, he struggles to pull her down to the ground and avoid getting sucked into the black hole. As you've probably caught on by now, the physics of this scene are fucked. Alongside the military and the Kryptonians, Lois is one of the first things that should have been pulled into the black hole as she was right next to them. But for some reason it has no effect on her whatsoever. Then, as she's falling, none of the debris from the ground smashes her into paste. As she continues to fall, Clark grabs her, but despite being infinitely stronger than her, Clark somehow struggles to escape the black hole. In short, the only way that this scene makes sense is if Lois has more mass than a black hole, and if that's the case, then that raises a lot of questions about her and the rest of the plot.
You are made of stupid.
As the black hole collapses in on itself, Clark lowers Lois down to the ground. The scene is a sad one. They look around, standing in the crater where thousands died, looking around at the destroyed buildings, the ruined streets, the bleeding, broken, PTSD-stricken eyes of the survivors, many of which have just lost their workplaces, their homes, their family and friends. As they take in all of this suffering and misery, Clark and Lois romantically kiss each other over the graves of innocent people, smiling and lusting for each other in front of the traumatized survivors who have just been through hell, with Lois finishing it off with a joke.
You know they say it's all downhill after the first kiss.
If you ever wanted a clear example of a scene that has no idea what tone it wants to convey to the audience, this is the clearest example I can give you. Because having the main characters romantically kissing each other and joking on in the middle of an active genocide zone while the traumatized survivors stare on is definitely a choice. Ignoring all that, this relationship doesn't make any sense either in universe or to the audience. And the reason for both of these things is exactly the same. They haven't been together nearly long enough to justify this. We've seen these two on screen together for what, 25-30 minutes at most, and in universe they've probably spent a few hours together, maybe a day, so it seems completely jarring seeing this relationship get to this point here, especially when a lot of their scenes together involve pushing the plot forward or just talking about the situation at hand instead of getting to know each other and love each other.
But why?
Why would you do that? Why would you do any of that?
As the two of them continue to try and make out with each other on top of a mass grave, they hear something in the distance, with Zod kneeling in the ruins of Metropolis and the Kryptonian ship. And let me tell you, I think it says a lot about a movie when the villain is more depressed and upset about the destruction than the hero is. As Clark gets to Zod, Goya and Zack decide to give us this little monologue.
Look at this. We could have built a new Krypton in this squalor, but you chose the humans over us. I exist only to protect Krypton. That is the sole purpose for which I was born. And every action I take, no matter how violent or how cruel, is for the greater good of my people. And now, I have no people. My soul. That is what you have taken from me.
This is a scene that is both needed for the film and something I absolutely despise. I despise it because I hate expository dialogue that serves no purpose other than to tell stuff to the audience that they can't convey in any other way. All that's happening in this scene is the movie is trying to tell us who Zod is because the writing wasn't strong enough to tell us anything throughout the entire movie. We should know already why Zod is trying to terraform Earth instead of going to any other planet and rebuilding Krypton, but the movie doesn't bother to tell us, so it has to try and justify what happened in the plot through this speech. But on the other hand, the scene is needed because otherwise there's no tragedy for Zod to make the end of this fight impactful. If you look thoroughly at his actions throughout the movie like we have, he just comes across like a genocidal lunatic that struggles to justify his actions in any conceivable way. So the film needs this speech to try and add depth to him before the final fight. It doesn't work for me, but if you're someone who just kinda watches the movie, then I'm sure this can trick you into thinking he's a tragic villain instead of an insane moron. Clark's facial expressions sum up my feelings on this scene perfectly. The fight between them starts, and I really don't care. Not just because of the characters or because they have the same powers or anything like that, it's just because I know that the plot will change the power levels to keep the plot going. Clark has spent longer in the Earth's atmosphere absorbing the sun and has more experience with his powers. So really he should be ending the fight right here, right now. But as we've seen plenty of times, he will have his powers when he shouldn't, he will show impressive feats of strength at his weakest that he will never do again at his strongest, and we have scenes where he is at full strength but somehow fails against weaker opponents. So I already know that Zod will somehow keep him on his feet until the plot needs the battle to wrap up. As the two begin to fight, we see that Zod has earned enough XP to use his laser vision. As he stands there not doing anything, Clark decides to heroically also stand there not doing anything. Good job, Clark.
Good job.
We also get this editing choice. Now, personally, I think having a close-up of Zod firing his lasers, then a wide shot of Zod firing his lasers, and then going back up to a close shot to see him firing his lasers is very goofy. But I'll leave it up to you whether you enjoy it. As Zod runs away, the 15-second freeze status that the plot inflicted on Clark wears off, allowing him to move and fly away from the building that is collapsing on the dozens of innocent people that he couldn't be bothered to save. As the fight spews out onto the street, Zod hurls an oil tanker at Clark, who proceeds to do absolutely nothing as it smashes into the multi-story car park, destroying it. Now, I'm not going to say for certain that anyone else was still in that parking lot, but considering the large amount of people we see still on the streets and in the buildings, it wouldn't surprise me if there were. That's on top of the millions of dollars of property damage that Clark didn't even bother trying to prevent.
You suck!
As the parking lot collapses behind him, Clark chooses to turn around. Why would you do this? He is trying to kill you and any innocent people nearby. Why would you turn your back on him so he can do whatever he wants? Do you just like watching expensive things burn? After choosing to let Zod hit him a bunch of times for shits and giggles, Clark remembers that he is stronger and more experienced than Zod, and begins to fight back. And then a car lands on him. So, despite the fact that he can fly through a world-changing terraforming device, spaceships made of a very durable material, and possesses enough strength to force wood through metal, somehow a car knocks him off balance. Shouldn't the car just bend around him or bounce off him? Or Clark should just smash through the car? But instead, this car has enough strength to knock Clark off balance, allowing Zod to regain his footing and hit him. After telling him that one of them needs to die for this battle to end, we get this scene. Now, I know he doesn't fly yet, but couldn't he just jump? Or jump up the side of the building maybe 2 or 3 times to hit him? Not gallop up like a gorilla? As he punches Zod into a building site, Clark is somehow taken by surprise by Zod, despite the fact that Clark has the ability to see through walls. As Zod leaps at him with a metal building support beam, Clark decides to aim at the end of the support beam with his laser vision, allowing Zod to get close enough to hit him. Hey Clark, you want to know what else you could do to stop Zod from hitting you and deal some damage to him? Instead of sending your full laser into the beam, why don't you just hit Zod with it?
You're a stupid man! A stupid, stupid man!
We then get this speech.
I was bred to be a warrior, Kal. Trained my entire life to master my senses. Where did you train? On a farm?
Putting the meme potential of
on a farm
to one side, this is another piece of expository bullshit to try and justify Zod suddenly mastering how to fly at super speed. You have to do this because Zod just doing this by himself would be very weird, so having this dialogue that kinda comes up with a reason for it is a bit more believable. I mean, it makes it believable until the realization of what he just said and what his current situation is hits you, and then you realize that it doesn't make sense. Just because you mastered a certain set of skills doesn't mean that you can suddenly instantly master another completely different set of skills. You know how in Battlefield and Call of Duty your character, despite just being a regular soldier, has the ability to instantly pilot tanks and helicopters and fighter jets? That's not actually how being a soldier works. The most experienced tank driver in the world won't have a fucking clue how to expertly pilot a helicopter. Zod telling us that he can master his heat vision and flying skills because he mastered some other non-superpowered skills is the equivalent of me saying that I can expertly pilot a Harrier jet because I passed my driving test for the first time I took it. Again, it's lazy, but the movie kinda needs it because otherwise the fight would be even more unbelievable than it was before. As Zod has his speech and begins to take his armor off, Clark once again just sits there, not doing anything. Good job! He only does so when Zod finishes his boss transition animation, like he's stuck in a fucking cutscene. The two of them fight above the city, where Clark loses track of where Zod is. I mean, he could use his X-ray vision, but that's not useful for the plot at the moment, so he won't. The two proceed to smash each other off the side of the buildings, with Zod then throwing Clark through several skyscrapers. Before we get to the next part, please remember that at no point do we see Clark try and take the fight out of the city or keep it in the crater zone. So Clark goes flying through the buildings, smashing off the floor, and then bursting out through the window, suspended above the street. As Clark hangs there, Zod collides into him and drags him out into space. Just in case you haven't been keeping track, Zod, in this moment, has now done more to keep the fights away from innocent people than Clark has throughout the entire movie.
I don't want to live on this planet anymore.
As they get up into orbit, they just so happen to come across a satellite. In the thousands of miles of orbit, they just so happen to go into the exact place that a satellite happens to be nearby. It's directly above them as they go up, and I'm not saying that it's impossible to happen, but I hope that we can agree that this is contrived as fuck. As they get close to the satellite, Clark, surrounded by an area that is 99% empty, chooses to throw Zod at the only piece of property that can be damaged in the local area. Once again, I'm not really sure why I'm supposed to root for this guy when, with the option of causing no damage at all or causing the maximum amount of damage in the nearby area, he chooses the second option. As Zod is thrown at the satellite, he proceeds to use it as a battering ram, throwing it into Clark before hitting him, fighting him as the two plunge down back into Earth, with debris raining down on Metropolis and causing even more damage. So as the two crash into the train station, Clark manages to get Zod into a chokehold and stops him from moving. Zod, realizing that he is unable to move, decides to use his laser vision and try and kill a family, making Clark choose between killing him and saving the family, or sparing Zod and forsaking the family in the process. After trying to stop Zod and failing, Clark decides to kill him, snapping his neck before breaking down in anguish and hugging Lois.
Feel anything?
No.
So where do I begin with this? For a start, here Clark is holding Zod down and letting him monologue for a good 20 seconds. During this time, all the civilians, even the ones closer to Zod than the family, have managed to run out of the way and get away from danger. So why did the family not manage to get out? Were they helping a loved one out of the rubble? Did one of them get injured and they had to slow down? No, they were all perfectly fine and they didn't have any problems moving. What if they were in shock and they couldn't move? They did just have a pillar land near them after all. That would be a fair point, except for the fact that, as I said, they are moving. And in fact, when they see Zod is being held down and the rest of the civilians are running away, they look like they're about to follow them, but then they decide to just move into the corner where there's no escape route, despite being given a good 15 seconds to follow the rest of the survivors.
I'm stupid! I'm stupid!
Secondly, did no one remember that human eyes aren't in a fixed position in your head? Now, I know he's a Kryptonian, but I think it's a pretty fair statement to assume basic things like the eyes and the tongue and the ears work just like humans do. So if I'm supposed to take this as Zod desperately wanting to kill these people, why wouldn't he just move his eyes to the right and kill them? This scene would be over in a second, with Clark having to live with the guilt of killing him and getting the family killed, but for some reason he just blankly stares in front of him.
I'm starting to fear that you're not very smart.
Thirdly, Zod is kneeling down because Clark has overpowered him, hence why Zod cannot break out of his hold and he is forced to sit there. Now, if this is the case, then why is Clark having such a hard time holding his neck in place? The muscles in the arms are a lot stronger than the muscles in the neck, yet for some reason Zod's neck is able to overpower both Clark's bicep muscles and the skeletal structure and continue to move in the opposite direction Clark is trying to pull him in. So if you're strong enough that your neck muscles are able to do this, then why aren't you strong enough to just overpower him in general?
The hospital called. Your test results came back positive. You're a stage 5 dumbass.
Fourthly, besides the heat vision, both of these people forget that they have superpowers. We are never given a reason why Clark cannot just fly up and take Zod away while holding him, or why he can't stomp the ground underneath them and throw Zod's aim off balance. And at the same time, Zod could try flying to try and shift Clark off him and continue his rampage, but that doesn't happen either.
Hello? Hello? Anybody home?
Fifthly, I'm supposed to believe that this family is trapped against this wall with no means of protecting themselves. But not only is there this massive chunk of debris that they can hide behind if they just move a little more to the right, but after the death scene, the movie camera cuts to a wide shot and we see that past this little bit of debris there is a massive clear space and some stairs where they could run out and get to safety. They don't even need to get right up to Zod to escape, they just need to move a little bit to the right here and they would be free. Again, they shouldn't have even gone into the corner in the first place, they should have followed the other survivors, but here they can still escape, but they just don't. So the only reason this trolley problem exists in the first place is because apparently this family is secretly suicidal.
I saved your life!
You didn't save my life, you ruined my death!
Sixthly, this is supposed to be a big moment where Clark emphasizes his support for humanity, and he chooses to let Zod die to support these choices, which would be a good way to cap off his story, if it wasn't for the fact that not only has Clark put more emphasis on his Kryptonian heritage and shown a complete distrust for humanity's ability to be good, but he's been casually killing off and getting people killed throughout the entire movie, yet it's these 4 people that he all of a sudden cares about. Not the people he killed in the gas station, not everyone who died in Smallville because of him, not the thousands that got wiped out because he couldn't be bothered to destroy the ships quicker and keep the much weaker and inexperienced Zod out of people's way. No, none of them mattered, but this family does, for some reason. I guess because the plot needed to wrap up. Seventhly, is Lois an Olympic athlete? Because considering the last time we saw her she was all the way over here, she arrives in a remarkably quick time. She isn't even out of breath when she gets here. Does Lois have super speed as well as more mass than a black hole? Yeah, this scene is a load of bullshit. I generally struggle to understand why this thing is heralded as such a sad and emotional thing, when not only has Clark been killing throughout the entire film, but if him killing Zod is supposed to be some tragic thing here and he doesn't want to be the last of his species, then maybe he shouldn't have mercilessly killed off the rest of his race in the first place. I will give props to Henry here though, I just wish this could have been justified by the movie. So we then cut to Swanwick and his side chick out in the desert, where a UAV drone comes crashing down in front of him. It's revealed that Superman has destroyed the drone, and he tells Swanwick to stop trying to find him, and that he's not a threat to the American government, leaving while the side chick gushes about how hot Superman is. Okay, so first off, they're trying to use UAVs to find out where Superman lives. Why? I think the house next to the barn where this alien pod was located is a pretty obvious location to start at, so I'm genuinely at a loss about how they don't know where he lives when they've already been there.
Did your mother drop you on your head when you were a baby?
Secondly, you are an unknown being that has been in a series of events that has led to a lot of deaths for a lot of people, and you operate on US soil. I think it's a pretty fair thing for the government to want to know about an unauthorized weapon flying around their country, and destroying their drones is only going to convince them to not trust you, so maybe don't do that obviously bad thing to do.
Oh my god! Wow!
And then, despite the amnesia water that these people have been drinking that made them forget about things they already know, and despite the fact that you've destroyed this drone and started this speech about how you're trying to cover your tracks, you then just blatantly tell him that you grew up in Kansas. But Lumar, Swanwick doesn't know if Superman's telling the truth. He wouldn't just believe this information. You're right. He wouldn't, which is why he would obviously investigate these claims, find the exact same clues that Lois did, and then find out where Clark lives. Because if a single reporter with no resources can find these clues, I'm pretty sure the biggest military and government in the world with billions of dollars worth of infrastructure and technology can as well.
Is your idiot brain getting fucked by stupid?
So yeah, absolutely baffling scene. It's already ruined by the fact that a previous plot point in the script makes this point completely void in the first place, which is about gaining their trust and concealing Clark's identity, is contradicted by the actions taken on screen and the information given. It then cuts to the Smallville cemetery, where Clark and Martha talk about how proud John would be and how he always supported Clark in becoming Superman. I mean, he didn't, but alright. We then get a nice little flashback of Clark pretending to be a superhero, with John looking on fondly. It would have been a nice scene if the rest of Jonathan Kent's scenes didn't also exist. We then see that Clark has decided to be a reporter when he isn't Superman, with him introducing himself to the rest of the reporters in the office. We also get this line.
Welcome to the planet.
I know writers who use subtext and they're all cowards.
Now, despite being a greeting, this is also designed on a subtextual level to be a greeting for Clark being on planet Earth, which, ignoring this film's random decision to have Clark identify more with his Kryptonian heritage than his human upbringing, he's already been here for 30 years. He has a life. He even has friends. So this subtext of welcome to the human race doesn't really mean much when we've already seen his entire life on the planet.
That doesn't make sense.
And so that ends Man of Steel, the best superhero origin of all time, the best Superman film of all time, and the film that demonstrates just how good Zack Snyder and his writing team is.
What a load of bullshit.
Let's wrap up, shall we? This film is one of the most boring, depressing, nonsensical superhero movies I've had to watch, choosing to focus on wishy-washy philosophy and action scenes over any actual substance. The first half of this movie is non-linear, with it supposed to be a story of Clark going through life while he gets flashes of his past, but all this does is pad out the story by needing to insert setup scenes that drag out the runtime, making it take even longer for anything to actually happen in the present day and become Superman. Then we get the second half. Most of the story occurs by people making insane decisions and forgetting their own power levels and resources. Clark is shown to have immense power yet constantly gets outmaneuvered and beaten down by much weaker opponents. Both the protagonists and the antagonists are quick to jump to insane solutions without a second thought, such as invading a planet that you know little of and have limited resources to take on, or opening a black hole before you try anything else. And it mostly just becomes a mess of characters doing dumb things, trying to make the plot points make sense, strange tonal shifts, and shaky CGI fights. Clark is depicted as an introverted individual desperately trying to find answers to his past, who in the end chooses to embrace his humanity over his Kryptonian heritage. Now, despite the fact that he only really discovers who he is shortly before the Kryptonians arrive, he chooses to focus on his Kryptonian side over the 30 years of human life that he's lived, acting like choosing the thing he's known his whole life over the history that he's only just discovered is some sort of big choice. On top of this, the movie tries to portray him as taking on the mantle of Superman because he wants to become a beacon of hope for the planet. But most of the time he comes across as completely apathetic towards the people around him, casually getting people killed and ruining buildings without any sort of hesitation, and showing him every once in a while saving someone isn't going to change that. He's also a dumbass, letting his father die to remain anonymous from the world only to immediately keep using his powers out in the public and drawing attention to himself, as well as just doing stupid things throughout the entire movie, like turning his back in the middle of a fight, incorrect use of his powers, or even just not using his powers to keep the plot going. I think Henry Cavill does a good job. He is good in the parts where he's allowed to be more than just a plank of wood, but overall it's just a wasted performance. Lois Lane is supposed to be depicted as a smart, fierce, intelligent reporter who is capable of hunting down the truth, but possessing enough heart to not ruin someone's life with it, and having enough bravery to fight for what she sees as right. Instead, most of the time she manages to do stuff because the plot helps her along, such as putting her in the exact room that she needs to be in and giving her the density of a black hole. And in actual fact, she usually does a lot of stupid stuff, such as antagonizing hostile alien weaponry and standing on the edge of an open plane door. Lois Lane is here for the majority of the story, not because she's actually a great reporter or because she's someone that Clark allows to tag along in his life. She's here because the film needed her in long enough to try and justify a romantic love interest, and so it keeps randomly inserting her into scenes to keep the story going until it reaches this point, with Amy Adams being unable to elevate the character to its fullest potential despite her attempts to. Jor-El is depicted as representing the nobility of a dying breed, stopping the reign of the current incompetent society while giving his son the hope needed to represent them on Earth, dying not once, but twice in his goal to stop Zod's madness from spreading. However, on closer inspection, Jor-El comes across as an incompetent hypocrite who tried to force his goals onto a naive and easily influenced young man. We're told that he's one of the brightest minds on Krypton, yet not only did he not manage to do anything to stop the very obviously stupid idea of mining the planet's core for fuel, but by the time he did so, it was too late for the planet to be saved. On top of this, despite acknowledging that going into space is the only way for their species to survive, and despite lecturing Clark that the symbol of the House of El is to always have hope and see goodness in people, Jor-El didn't even bother trying to save any other members of his species, ensuring only one ship for his son was ready for Earth, despite spaceships being readily available for him to evacuate people on. And while he may have had a point about some members of his species, such as the council members and the scientists that mine the core, he has no excuse for not saving the other classes of Kryptonian, especially as he is a living example that they can change their behaviour and knowledge to grow as an individual. Once dead and given AI form, he then fails multiple times to take steps in stopping Zod's invasion, causing even more damage and death and forcing the heroes to engage in a colossally stupid plan before dying again. Russell Crowe tries to bring across a man of nobility and honour burdened by the weight of his society, but good acting can't help a damaged character. Speaking of stupid Kryptonians, we then move on to General Zod. The film wants us to see him as an individual bred to be hyper-focused on protecting his people, turning into an extremist when he believes that the council is not doing the best that can be done, and ultimately fighting for a doomed society. After escaping the Phantom Zone, he tried to fulfill his biological programming and revive his planet and race, dying a tragic figure after losing everything that gave his life purpose. And at first, despite the film's intentions, Zod initially comes across as the only sane person at the start of the film, removing the incompetent Kryptonian leaders and trying to encourage Jor-El to work with him, only for his plans to fail and he and his crew to be banished. But then, after losing his planet and having only a few dozen of his crew left, Zod goes out in hopes of reviving his species, and after discovering the tools he would need to make that possible, he then proceeds to start a war that not only might destroy the tools he needs, but is also completely pointless in every meaning of the word. We're supposed to feel sorry for Zod at the end, a man who loses everything in the pursuit of reviving his species, but the only thing I feel sorry for is that Michael Shannon put so much passion and energy into a flat, incoherent character, not made any better by the fact that they just awkwardly shove in explanations for him to master his powers to be a credible threat to Clark and give us a fight scene, as if saying something that makes no sense somehow makes things better. Jonathan Kent is designed to be an optimistic but realistic minded figure trying to guide Clark along the right path, teaching him restraint and caution so that when the time comes, he will know when and how to use his powers for the betterment of mankind, a goal that he is willing to die for. Except for the fact that not only does Jonathan deliberately go out of his way to gaslight Clark into submission when he's proven wrong, but when revealing his origin he also mentions that he's already revealed Clark and his origin to people in the world, and it's only because of the terrible world building that Clark isn't a public figure in Kansas. This is on top of having one of the dumbest death scenes you can imagine. Perry White, the guy in charge of the Daily Planet and Lois's boss, could have been an amazing character, DC's J. Jonah Jameson, with Lawrence Fishburne being able to convey both the antagonistic and pushing boss as well as the caring, compassionate person. Unfortunately, while J. Jonah Jameson is deliberately designed to be over the top and hyperactive, explaining his quick decisions and punishment towards employees, Perry is not. He is written to be a competent and intelligent individual, and as such the actual caring person expressed to us is a bit difficult to take seriously when he willfully chooses to punish his employees, even when they're doing exactly what he tells them to do, for no adequately explained reason. Faora is there. No, having a scene where you cry, recite a cringe speech, and having an okay catchphrase doesn't make you a character. Never mind a good one. She is a tool for the story. You could remove her from it and nothing of substance would be lost. Science Guy is also just there to explain sciencey stuff to the audience and the people around him, serving nothing more than to push the plot forward, regardless of how moronic his scientific suggestions come across. But character-wise, it's not all doom and gloom. Chad is a small character who doesn't get a lot of screen presence presence but manages to make an impact, showing him as an individual who initially distrusts Superman and only cares about his own men, to slowly coming to terms with the fact that he and Clark are on the same side, following his plan and dying to save the planet. It's very basic, but it works, and he's also played by Christopher Nolan, a great actor, and I'd recommend you watch him in Happy, one of my favourite shows where you see him play a crazed hitman who talks to an imaginary cartoon horse. Then we have Swanwick, a hard-ass general who is struggling to manage the US as the world comes to terms with the fact that not only are aliens attacking, but that one of them has been living in the US this whole time. We see a realistic portrayal of a man who doesn't fully trust this foreign being, but comes to accept his presence and his ideals. And finally, Martha. Except for one very stupid scene, Martha is shown to be a strong, compassionate and understanding mother who tries to navigate the fact that despite her love and affection towards Clark, he also needs to strive for answers. And despite this pushing him further and further away from her, she is happy that he is able to find some semblance of peace with his identity. When push comes to shove, she will always try her best to stand for her son and give advice when she can, with her character really connecting thanks to the great acting of Diane Lane and her chemistry with Henry Cavill. So the main story is a mess and most of the characters are incompetent and pushed along by the plot, with only the actors being able to give them any sort of substance. So, how about the world building? The Kryptonian race is destroyed because of everyone returning to Krypton and draining its natural resources, and the reason for this is... the plot needed it to, because there's no way any group of beings could be this incompetent if they have the intelligence to spread across the galaxy for thousands of years. On top of this, somehow the Civil War just starts and is in full gear in about 5 minutes, and we later see that no one tries to escape and the most important relic in Kryptonian history is just left there for anyone to steal whenever they want. We're told that Clark needs to keep himself a secret, because exposure could be disastrous and lead to the government and the world coming after him. However, not only does Clark do something that should have had the entire county talking about him that is somehow just brushed away with no investigation by the government, but we see people immediately embrace him and praise him for what he did, only for John in the plot to brush this aside to insist that he needs to stay a secret. Clark is depicted as an isolated man wandering the earth in search for answers, with him finally being rewarded for his search in the harsh Arctic climate. But he only manages to find the answers he needs because the plot teleports some soldiers into his pub right when he's working, and then has them publicly talk about confidential information right next to him. On top of this, despite having so much confidence in his father's beliefs that he shouldn't expose himself and being completely in control of his emotions to the point where he can stand back and watch his father die without doing anything, later in his life Clark repeatedly lets his emotions get the better of him in very public ways, with Clark only getting away with it because he magics up fake documents whenever needed, and apparently people just don't care about the miraculous events that occur unless someone asks them about it, with not even the government bothering to do the difficult tasks of checking CCTV or using modern surveillance software to find him. And what about the themes? Throughout the movie, 3 of the main talking points are about who Clark is as a person, the idea of choice and free will, and humanity's fear of what they don't understand. First, we will talk about the identity one, as I feel like this is more of just how I view it and I'm sure other people can interpret it differently. So, Clark is an alien, but despite that he was raised as a human by 2 religious human parents. So how is Clark going to identify himself to the world, the whole nature versus nurture debate? Throughout the film, we are supposed to take it that while he is interested in his history, he ultimately chooses to identify as human. However, I struggle to understand why, to be honest, because throughout the film he constantly refers to Kryptonians as his people, and the film struggles really to give us anything to really connect him to Earth besides Martha. He does seem to be friends with Ginger Kid, but we don't see them hang out or do anything of substance to signify their friendship. He doesn't really do anything to emphasize how much of a life he has on Earth, and in the church scene, despite Zod threatening to attack the Earth, he acts like humanity are also dicks, saying that he doesn't trust them. From my point of view, when you reach the scene where Zod wants him to join them, if Zod didn't decide to be a complete fucking idiot and show that he's actually just Space Hitler, I genuinely feel like Clark would have just left with them and abandoned Earth, because throughout this movie he chooses to identify more with them than the people he's been living with his whole life. The second part of the themes, one that I'm more certain about, is the idea of choice and free will. At the start of the movie, and in the bully scene, the film tries to emphasise the importance of free will, and no matter what, it's up to you to decide who you want to be. And in the end, this is ultimately what leads to Clark wanting to be Superman. This doesn't work, however, because these 2 figures also say the exact opposite of this as well. Jonathan tells Clark he has to decide what sort of man he wants to be and that only he can choose, yet despite showing throughout the film that he wants to use his powers to help save people, Jonathan refuses to let him do so, controlling what he's allowed to do and stopping him from becoming who he wants to become. Jor-El states that Clark will be free from the shackles of Krypton and will be allowed to live his own life however he wants on Earth. And when he is choosing the planet, he only makes comments on the atmosphere, the sun, and the fact that he can blend in with humans there. Despite this, it is revealed that Jor-El actually intended for Clark to discover the ship in the Arctic, wear the Superman suit, and become a bridge between Earth and Krypton in the form of Superman, once again contradicting this idea of freedom and choice. The third part of the themes is about how mankind will always be fearful of things that we don't understand. Throughout the movie, Clark keeps himself hidden from the world because he's worried that if people discovered what he actually is, they will react in fear and turn against him. This is supposed to be emphasised in the actions of John Kent, how people react to the presence of aliens and how the military treat Clark. But this also fails because, as I've emphasised several times already, Pete's mom
was an act of God, Jonathan.
Like, this is Clark's first time exposing his nature to the world, and the world reacts by praising and loving him. Then we have people being afraid of Zod and his people, and like, yeah, of course they're afraid of him. He took over the world's electronics and then threatened to kill them if his demands weren't met. What, if a human did the same thing, do you think the world wouldn't panic? Of course they would. If the world was truly afraid of aliens and things they don't understand in this scene, they would have tried to nuke the alien ship, not trying to talk to it. And again, in this scene they've just been told that they need to hand Clark over or their planet will be attacked. Of course they're going to try and use force to get him to surrender and take every precaution with him so that he doesn't escape. Later, once they realise that Zod is going to attack them anyways and that Clark wants to help, they don't become buddy-buddy with him, but they trust him enough to listen to him and work with him. Overall, the themes for this movie suck. So, in summary, the CGI is somehow outclassing projects released within the past few years. The music is bombastic and impactful. Certain moments of the fight scene choreography are great. The prop and costume designs are unique and the actors definitely bring their all to the movie. But we also have characters who, even with the talent ascribed to them, are unable to function on a basic level thanks to the abysmal plot and world building. Most of the fight scenes are rubbery and poorly choreographed, not helped by the strange decision to shoot fight scenes using heavy zooming and shaky cam. And while the movie has some beautiful imagery and cinematography, most of the time the colour palette of the film is dreary and draining. And this, combined with everything else, helps to make for a miserable experience. I've heard people say that Zack does understand colour in his films, showing images such as this, as if these sort of images support his statement. It's a fucking sun. I don't think it's physically possible to make the sun look draining and lifeless, considering it's a giant ball of light. What, I'm supposed to give praise for a sun looking like a sun? This somehow proves that Zack knows colours, when every other scene with all these other colours shows them being the most boring and lifeless scenes possible. He made the sky look like a polluted Chinese city, and that doesn't show how bad his colour grading is. With the release of the Avengers and the end of Phase 1 of the MCU, DC were clearly in desperate need for something to come along and start their own universe. And it's true that at the start, things seemed good for DC, only for the films to begin to decline. But personally, I don't think trying to MCUify the DCEU was what caused it, because if they actually copied the MCU, then they would have been successful. Marvel was all the rage in the mid to late 2010s. Copying that would have been a good idea. No, the thing that caused the DCEU to downfall is the fact that it didn't get off to a good start to begin with. And it doesn't matter whether you're going for something dark and edgy or bright and jokey. If you just keep on cranking out poorly written slop with characters people struggle to care for and god-awful visual styles, then of course it's going to fail. And so that's the best way I can describe Man of Steel. Just another addition to the DCEU. It's not the best superhero origin film, it's not the best Superman film, it's not the best Zack Snyder film, and it's not even a good superhero film. It's just another one of DC's live action movies that people think is good because it chooses to be serious and miserable on top of being bad. Thanks for watching, lads and lasses. If you enjoyed the video, please consider liking, subscribing, and checking out some of my other videos. Sharing always helps, and if you're feeling really generous, please consider my Patreon or YouTube membership. I also have a Twitter and sometimes I do live streams. But overall, I just hope you had a great day and hopefully I will see you in the next video.